you. Can we do a roll call, please?
Chair Cooney, Vice Chair Snyder,
Here.
Commissioner Keller,
Here?
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
and Council Liaison Sneddon.
Here.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes, Vice Chair Snyder, there is a change. Item 6D on the agenda, we are looking for a recommendation on that item. It does say presentation, which we will be giving one, but we are looking for a recommendation to council.
Got it, thank you. And is there any public comment on anything not on the agenda today?
I see no hands raised.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to consent items. Consent item A is meeting minutes. Joshua, is that, any comments on that? Any comments on meeting minutes from last month? No? Okay. Move on to item 5B, which is the construction management services for the water main replacement projects agreement. Any comments on that? No?
Madam
Okay.
Chair, make a motion to approve consent calendar. Second?
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Snyder.
Yes. We'll go ahead and move on to administrative items, starting with item 6A, wastewater system annual report.
Good morning. Morning. Vice Chair Snyder, Water Commissioners, my name's Amanda Flessy, and with me here today is our wastewater treatment Superintendent Thomas Welch, and we will be presenting our wastewater system annual report for the fiscal year 2023. And to remind everyone, our fiscal year is from July 1st of 2022 to June 30th of 2023. In this presentation, we'll overview events occurred at the wastewater treatment facility, in our wastewater collections, and our capital improvement projects. Before we get started, what I always like to do is I love to sit there and note and really celebrate the team and what we have incurred this year, which was quite a bit. Before all of our festivities took place at the beginning of the 2023, we were able to celebrate a couple of employees, long-term employees. Mr. Joaquin Ortega was a longtime maintenance technician, senior maintenance technician at El Estero, and he is just a great asset to our team leader. He leads all of our maintenance projects, and we are proud to nominate and award him with Employee of the Month of December 2022. As well as Gerardo Soria. He is our chief operator at El Estero, and he's just great in putting so much data together in our reports, in our weekly reports, and communicating that out to our managers, and also providing a lot of data in your monthly reports as well, in the management reports. So we were able to celebrate him in February of 2023. But a lot of excitement happened in 2023. So first off, what I would like to point out is our El Estero operations and maintenance team. They incurred a lot in 2023, especially with the SCE big transmission that went down. And if you, in these pictures right here, this is how big it is. So if you look, this is the old one, and it's right there on the Yananali site.
Could you turn on that monitor?
No. It's not working.
Oh, what about these?
They tried. They tried before you got here. Okay. System's down.
Much like the transformer, those are down, and so we need to replace those and get those fixed. But there was the new one right there, and so I liken these to the World Series and kind of Super Bowl events, and I liken the SCE more of the World Series because that was a 6-game event. We were able to clinch in six days, so in 6 games right there, and got this on board. And I really want to honor Thomas and his crew for being on top of things and 24 hours monitoring, because we were on backup power. It was very nerve-wracking. Rains were still coming in, and they did it without nobody even knowing that we were in a little bit of an issue. Also, I'd like to, what we celebrated in May was a lot of the collections team, what they experienced over the 3 months of consistent rain. So this is a video of what one of our storm drains looked like on January 9th, and really what they had to incur when the De La Vina Creek, right next to, this is at De La Vina and Vernon, is overflowing, and so we are getting impacted, and this is our crews out there every single day, making sure that we are vacuum up everything, any kind of discharges. But mostly at that point, it's just rain flow. All right, so now I will turn it over to Thomas and speak about our wastewater treatment. Next slide, please.
The presentation today, I'll be covering a brief introduction, talk about a little bit of our operations and the maintenance programs and our regulatory compliance. Thanks. So we went over the treatment process diagram last year. I don't know if I want to spend too much time going over that again, but
Excuse me, but I just got to tell you, that's a great diagram. I mean, absolutely. Go over it because, again, when I got to the report and I saw that, I just went, wow, I love that diagram. Everybody needs to understand what happened, so please.
okay, I'll go over it then. This is actually a modified version of our main SCADA screen, and so this is the operators use this to interface with our control system every day. And we've just cleaned it up a little bit, removed a lot of the numbers to make it a little more clear for the presentation. But across the top of the screen, going from the left to the right, is the liquid train of the treatment process. So we have our influent pump station with our headworks bar screens where we remove all the inorganic and trash material before it comes into the plant. Then it goes into our grit chamber, which is a aerated tank that helps remove very fine silt, gravel, and seeds kind of material that our aerobic and anaerobic bacteria cannot digest. Then it actually gets into the treatment process and goes into our primary clarifiers, which are just settling tanks that allow the heavy material to sink, the light material to float. Then, and with that, we can remove probably half the material coming into the wastewater plant. To remove that second half of the material is we have to go into our biological treatment stage, which is the aeration basins and the clarifiers. And that's where we can get up to 98, 99% removal of all materials coming into the treatment plant by weight. Then after clarification, we go into our contact chamber, and that's for disinfection and dechlorination. That's how we can sterilize. We're not quite sterilizing, but we're disinfecting the wastewater, or treated wastewater before ocean discharge. Before the contact chamber, we have the ability to siphon off up to, at peak usage, about 20 to 25% of our influent flow for recycled water production. So that's going into the UF filter in that black box on the bottom right. After the filter, we have another chlorine contact basin for disinfection for that recycled water. And then we have our distribution system going out to our on-site, off-site reservoir, which is under Muni Golf Course, which is represented by that green with the putting green on there. So that's the end of the liquid train. And then all the solids that are removed from the liquid train of the treatment process have a further treatment process. We have two thickeners, a DAF and a gravity thickener, which are represented in the middle. Those take the bacteria solids and other materials, thicken them up to a concentration where our anaerobic bacteria can then digest those materials. And in that digestion process, they produce methane gas, which we capture and are able to beneficially reuse to power half the treatment plant's energy demands. So that's what you see with Cal Power. That's our public-private partner organization. And after digestion, we're going into our belt filter presses where we dewater the solids and prepare them for hauling off-site for off-site composting by a private company that helps us meet Class A biosolids quality, so our biosolids can be beneficially reused by land application.
I appreciate you taking a moment to do that, because this does get filmed, goes on TV, and honestly, people need to be educated as to what happens once they flush that toilet. And I gotta tell you, for me, getting into public service way back 50 years ago, it was the most amazing thing to understand what happened. So you guys are superstars, and again, need to be recognized in that regard. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Just as a plug for those watching, we do have a YouTube. The city does have a YouTube channel, and we have process description videos. We're currently working on a new chapter that'll go in depth onto our tertiary treatment. So we're working on a whole series to do a full plant tour. Well, I was going to talk a little bit about my team that keeps this whole plant running. And so I have 3 teams working with me. So I have an operations team of 15 operators and a supervisor, a maintenance team with 5 technicians and 3 controls technicians, and my planning and administration team, which has a planner and 2 admin staff. And none of this would happen without them, and just really thankful. We've had a lot of changes in our maintenance team this year. We had a promotion for a new maintenance supervisor. With that promotion, he vacated his planner scheduler position, so we hired a new planner. The new planner vacated a technician position, so I had to hire a new technician. So there was kind of a progression of vacancies, and so it's finally this last week we got back to full staffing in our maintenance team. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's affected us later in the presentation. So you can go next slide.
We're on slide 8 now.
Slide 8. So in addition to operating and maintaining the treatment plant, the maintenance group is responsible for operating and maintaining the 7 lift stations in the community. And so some of these are as small as a 4-foot little wet well in the Samarkand neighborhood to the Braemar pump station down in near Arroyo Burro, which is our biggest lift station, has 2 8-inch pumps there. Or 12-inch pumps, excuse me. Next slide. So this slide is just showing, this is I'm tried to keep the numbers down for you guys and really tell the story of what's going on, but this really graphically shows some of the conditions we've been seeing over the last year. Is it safe to say the drought ended in January? So we've been facing really challenging conditions in the wastewater plant. Our influent flows with the combination of water conservation and lack of low groundwater, less inflow into the system, we've seen really high concentrations of solids. So on the right graph, that's our influent solids. And you can see those in the tall purple line, those are the influent solids coming to the plant. And so as the flow decreases, the population in Santa Barbara isn't decreasing, the level of visitors, and so that means the solids and the organic strength of the waste coming into the community isn't decreasing. It's just the dilution is decreasing. So we've seen very high strength solids coming into the treatment plant, and while we are designed for 11 million gallons per day, we're right now only receiving about 6 million gallons per day. I was just looking at a comparison for the first quarter of 2023, that was July and September of 2022. We treated 5.84 million gallons per day. This same time this year, we're up to 6.21. And so that's just because we're still getting some infiltration and inflow into the collection system, which as long as it's not overusing my capacity is good because it helps freshen up the wastewater a little bit. The treatment and collections have a little bit different view on some of these issues we're having. So everything in moderation. Compare that to quarter 3 of this year, January to March, we treated an average of 7.8 million gallons per day. So we were getting an extra 1.2 million gallons, 1.6 million gallons of flow per day coming into the treatment plant in the form of I&I. Next slide. So with these declining flows and resulting in a more concentrated influent stream, it makes the wastewater more challenging to disinfect. We have our entire treatment process is physical and biological. with a small chemical portion at the end for disinfection. And so when we have septic influent, which is anaerobic, it changes the constituents of the solids to be more dissolved and harder to digest. It makes our treatment process more difficult. It results us in using more chemicals, more energy for air, and sometimes have water quality issues. So one of the things we attempted earlier in Q2 was a nanobubble pre-treatment pilot installation from a company called Moliere, and they're on like the cutting edge of technology with this. Unfortunately, our pilot started in November, and with the rains in January, it completely changed our operating conditions. And so our pilot project, we were not able to get really statistically significant results. We had too many process control changes to make broad assumptions on the effect of their treatment process. So we are still in conversations with them. There's a lot of other agencies in the nearby community and in the greater state that are also communicating with them, because we are not the only ones dealing with this hard to digest high strength influent flows issues.
I had a question about mitigation strategies, and this might be a totally stupid question, but are there options to like blend either like recycled water or the wastewater effluent with the influent to dilute it, or are they like, you know, at the beginning of the process dilution strategies?
Yes, we actually have a secondary effluent return system, so thank you for bringing that up. It's something that got installed in the 2019 upgrades project, and that's was more of a hydraulic mitigation strategy because of our very tight footprint at El Estero. We don't really have room for an equalization basin or something like that to help balance these flows. And so we do return up to at night it's like 3/4 of our flow. We're returning back to the headworks to equalize that flow. And that does help reduce septicity once it's inside the plant, but it doesn't help the flow coming into the plant. And so there are some emerging technologies that we are keeping an eye on to see if we may be able to do something to help mitigate and improve this wastewater condition before it gets to the treatment plant.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So this is just from the county's hydrological webpage. I think I was opening this tab 30 times a day during the winter just to see what was going on. But we could see, this is from the county building. We did that January 9th storm, 6 inches of rain in Santa Barbara. So we can go next slide. So in preparations for these winter storms, our collection system is a sanitary system. So we're not a combined sewer system. So we should not be seeing significant flows. But unfortunately, we do have some I&I issues. And those result in a lot of concerns for us. We are right next door to Laguna Channel. So you can see in the middle picture, that's one of our flood walls. And this is a technology that's used in Europe and other areas. And that's a deployable wall that we use to protect our low-lying areas of the plant. So that like our emergency generator is located in that building, so we really don't want it to flood. So we preemptively load up the flood walls. The bottom left picture shows our clarifiers during a high flow condition, where you can see the effluent flow goes over those V-notch weirs into those troughs. That's a picture of us during peak flow. The troughs are completely submerged, and we were at our hydraulic capacity for over 12 hours. We had all 4 of our influent pumps pumping every gallon of water they could out of the sewer system for 12 hours straight. And we had to restrict flow coming into the plant because our station was starting to flood inside the pump station. So on the far right, we also have issues with some of our lift stations. That's at Linda Road on the Mesa, and that station, the pumps were not able to keep up with the incoming flow. And this is something that we've been able to work with the collection system crew, and we gave them notice that, hey, this station, we're really having issues maintaining flow in the winter, and they did some smoke testing earlier this year. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but, and so they do the smoke testing to look for illegal connections that might be contributing I&I to our pump stations, because that's one of our our pump stations are our bottlenecks in the system. Luckily, they're only about probably less than 10 to 15% of our flow coming into the plant, but in those localized areas, they can act as a bottleneck. You can go next slide, please. So Amanda kind of touched on our Edison transformer failure already. What she didn't fully lay out was that when this went down on March 9th, we had been experiencing blower issues for the week before, the 3 or 4 days before. And so our aeration blowers are 900 horsepower electric motors that provide the air and the oxygen that drive our biological process. And 2 of our 3 blowers failed. Our first blower failed earlier in the week, and our second blower failed on Thursday. And so we were troubleshooting this thing, trying to figure out what's going on. It was giving us an electrical fault that we'd never seen before. And in hindsight, we realized that it wasn't the equipment that was failing, it was the source power that was dirty, and the blower was failing to protect itself so it wouldn't get damaged. So once the power completely went out, we put 2 and 2 together and realized, oh, this isn't our equipment failing, this is dirty power coming into the plant, and it was the death throes of the transformer that was causing those failures. So we were on our 2 megawatt diesel generator for 6 days straight, using about 1,000 to 1,500 gallons of diesel per day to power the treatment plant, put that in perspective of that relative energy use. The first night was very stressful. We had some lack of communication with Edison, but once we got the right people in touch with each other, Edison was very supportive, very helpful, and they were able to get us a backup generator in 3 days on site, and it took them 3 days to get it connected. If we can go next slide and just show this. I have some pictures of the delivery of the transformer coming on site. I believe it was at least 20 tons of weight, so that's a oversized load. We had to do emergency permits with Caltrans, so we learned a lot going through that. So that's not something we do every day. And then Edison's crew had the most specialized forklift I've ever seen. It's one that the whole thing extends, and our forklift has a heel on the forks that are maybe 1.5 inches thick. This forklift was 6 inches thick of steel to pick up that heavy device, and their crews were a very large crew, and they didn't always know they didn't know each other. They were all from different departments, so but it all came together extremely quickly, because on that previous slide I showed you, we had rain during these events, and you cannot do high voltage electrical terminations in rain. So we were trying to shoehorn Edison was shoehorning these repairs before and after these rain events, and even ocean fog is too much humidity to do these high voltage tests. So we were very fortunate that we were able to get the generator back online, or the transformer back online, and get off our generator with no harm, because that generator is also a 25-year-old generator. Yes.
A question for you. So we have backup generators that run on diesel. Can we run those indefinitely?
We can run those as long as we have an emergency condition. And so we have a permit with the Air Pollution Control District.
Okay.
And there's a limit to hours for non-emergency use. But when we're in an emergency condition, we can run them as long as we need to.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
It was interesting last September when we had that heat wave, you may recall that. There was a temporary time period where they did suspend that, suspend the limitations on generators, because they wanted to try and get as much as they could off of the electrical grid so they didn't bring the whole thing down. But it's a very unique circumstance. Typically, we sparingly use the backup generators. We do our testing monthly, and then, of course, when we have an emergency situation, but very infrequent use.
Do we have a backup to the backup?
Yo.
Okay.
No, that is exactly why the staff were there 24/7 during, when we were running the generator. We had full-time shift coverage because exactly, there was no backup to that. And that's why it was fantastic. Our Public Works Director was heavily involved in that too. And we got the upper SCE folks involved. And once they understood the gravity of the situation, it was quite impressive what they could mobilize. So it was helpful.
We can go next slide, Amanda. Thank you. So I just want to quickly touch on some maintenance activities that we have going on at the plant. Within the performance metrics that were reported in the report, one of the things we're really proud of is 90% of our work orders by hours are proactive. So 90% of our hours are in an organized, pre-scheduled manner for repair work, which frees us up to do more complex repairs that we might have contracted out in the past. So in the middle picture, you can see one of our technicians doing some grinding and welding on the clarifier tracks. Normally, that work would have been contracted out in the past. Same with some of the valve replacements.
I just want to point out, this is Joaquin right there,
Oh, thank you.
our EOM that took that on.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No, thank you. And then the other, on the far right there, we're running a new recycled water line, and this is something that we normally wouldn't have done in-house either. We're running a new line to one of our buildings to try and move some water that was in potable/industrial water to a recycled water use to try and aid some more conservation efforts. So we can go next slide. Just briefly on our compliance issues, we had 2 exceedances of our permit limitations in fiscal year 2023. One was an effluent coliform daily maximum limit, and that's a biological test, and it really didn't correlate with any other process parameters that we could see, and it was a 1-day spike, and everything returned to normal about the next day. Which is a challenge with these bacteriological tests because you're growing bacteria in the lab and then seeing what responds. So we suspect there might have been some contaminant or potentially, but because we couldn't really pinpoint anything, we did report it as a violation. The other exceedance we had was on the January 9th rainstorm. We exceeded the total solids that we were allowed to discharge by weight. We met our concentration limit, but because our flow was over our design capacity, I think we treated 21 million gallons per day, and our peak flow is normally 18 million gallons per day design. We exceeded that total solids by pounds for that 1 day, even though we met our concentration limit. And then we had 2 monitoring violations this year where both with recycled water, we've had a consolidation of our permits recently, and so we've had a couple hiccups with sampling frequency and analysis frequency. So in Q2, we grabbed the sample and didn't analyze it, and in October, we had a fouled sample tube. So we've had some new retraining opportunities to get all our operations and lab staff working together in a better fashion. And lastly, we did resubmit our sea level rise adaptation plan in April of 2023. This was something that was due in April of 2022. But with the state required an update of our local hazard mitigation plan, which was not previously submitted because it was not complete. So once we got that updated local hazard mitigation plan, we were able to resubmit the report and meet every requirement within that permit requirement. Go next slide. And so lastly, just preview for this fiscal year coming up. We've started replacing our electronic O&M manual. That's has all of our SOPs, vendor manuals, process descriptions, troubleshooting guides. It's really the Bible for the operations staff. That's on a 10-year-old software platform. We worked with IT this year to select a new software. We've moved to the city's internal website. And so that's ongoing this fiscal year. We're replacing the membranes for the recycled water. I have a delivery estimate of November, and so we'll be replacing those in-house. We bought the modules with capital funds but the installation will all be done by city staff. And then lastly, we're continuing our SCADA server and workstation upgrades, and hopefully I'll have even a better, cooler graph for you guys once that our screens are all redone. Thank you.
Any questions on the treatment side before we move on to collections?
Thank you. That is an incredible presentation. Thank you. I just have a question about the biological processes, and when you have alternating drought and then severe storm and this sort of climate change and more rapidly changing extreme weather events, and then also the time of the year when we have many more visitors versus other times, fluctuations not just within the week, but seasons. And are we at capacity of what we can handle with our wastewater, or what would we need to do to build capacity?
Council Liaison Sneddon, with the 2019 upgrades project, they designed the plant to meet current demands and projected future demands, so we're not at capacity. And we've been working with our operations consultant, Trussell Technologies, to really help us implement more predictive process control adjustments and give the operators a little bit more scientific tools. Historically it was very art, it was like operating the plant was an art and not really a science, and we're trying to formalize a lot of that. And so we have I put a slide of it, or a picture of it in the paper report, of the process control tracking sheets and our sludge retention time tracking sheets. So a lot of that is being formalized and modernized, is a safe way to say that.
Thank you for all you're doing. It seems very tricky balance. Thank you.
Just congratulations to the team. I mean, you guys do a fantastic job in the background, and the city doesn't notice it, but it's a really, really great job. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the second half of the great team that supplies all the wastewater to the Wastewater Resource Center. Brief overview, 257 miles of gravity system, mostly 6 and 8 inch, so very, very small. And our 7 lift stations. We are also a very aging system, so a lot of cracks and rehabilitations and repairs are required. And we have right now 2 miles of force mains, and those are mostly from our lift stations, meeting up with our gravity system. This year, we had an unfortunate year with all of the rains. The majority of a lot of our overflows were from the January 9th. And however, we did have some issues with the team. At the beginning of the year, we did not have enough staff. But throughout the year, we were able to gain more staff and really train them. They got a lot of training between January and March, so that was good for the new staff. But you could tell in your packets, where I probably won't get in the nitty-gritty of the data, but that data shows in the beginning we had a little bit more spills because of the short staff, and you could tell that we are getting our staff up to speed, and we're cleaning more and we're addressing more items. As we have 80%, we did meet our goal of scheduling pipes at an assigned cleaning time. We did meet 84% of that. A lot of our pipes got cleaned with those storms, so that helped out quite a bit. And I would also like to really highlight our fats, oils, and grease program. Our pre-treatment coordinator in that area does a fantastic job working with a lot of the restaurants in the downtown area and all over Santa Barbara, getting them in compliance and researching them. So that helps quite a bit.
A question for you. I think I read in the report that at times you put chemicals into the lines to clean them. Are you coming up to that?
Yes.
All right. So my question is going to be, how does that affect the treatment plant when those chemicals come down into the plant itself, if they do?
Okay, we'll address that. Okay, so The SSO events, really, we look at those in detail because that data tells us what we need to know. So we have a lot of grease, wipes, roots, rainfall. Is there problems with the pipe? Is it grease? And that really kind of explains where we go with our programs. And so looking at this, 33% was other, and that's that rainfall events. And so we are still having a big problem with roots, but it also looks like we're having a big problem with debris getting in, and that is from the rain events. Or we did have a few vandalism items as well, and that tend to happen. It's unfortunate, but it does tend to happen, especially when people think that the sewer system is also your drainage system. So they open up the manholes thinking that they can go ahead and drain their areas. And so we do see that a lot, but as Thomas was saying, we have a bunch of items that we are gathering data so we can really track that down and address that and maybe put locking manholes or do whatever it is that we need to do to address that item, that behavior. So our cleaning programs. We have a cleaning program, which all of our sewer system mains are in the cleaning program in one way or another. We also have an acoustic program, which helps us with if there's any blockages. So it's a quick, easy way to see if there's any blockages. If we get anything acoustically, then we'll send a CCTV camera down there to really see what it is that's blocking the area. Our chemical cleaning. That is another program. So that helps address the roots in our mains, and it's a quick, effective way for a long term, maybe a year or two, to address the roots and prevent any roots coming in. And then maybe we can go in and make our rehabilitation repairs. And then of course our fog management, our fats, oils, and grease, having that program, making sure that when grease gets into our system, it's kind of like concrete. It solidifies and it makes it really, really hard to remove, and it catches a lot of debris or anything which causes blockages and potential SSOs. Our cleaning program. So what I would like to point out is we are really trying to make strides. I really want to reduce these multi-year cleaning frequencies, and so that is our focus. We worked really hard to increase this once-a-year cleaning program. And so by addressing and putting a lot of these multi-cleaning per year items in other programs, maybe accelerated root control, CIP, do smoke testing, we try to identify what is causing the frequencies of these cleaning programs. If we are able to get everything either on a 12 to 60-month program, then we are very successful we can maintain our cleaning program with the staffing that we have. But the more we have to clean the frequency, the more staff that requires.
And just kind of give you an idea of what that looks like in the downtown area, it's very flat. You get these flat lines, things start settling out in the lines, and then in order to make sure that never turns into a blockage, we're having to come in there, twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, and clean those lines. And so what's difficult is there isn't an easy solution to those. So, you can't really change the grade without having major ramifications upstream and downstream. But trying to look at different ideas, potentially pipe design, size, that you can keep the velocities going so that things don't settle out. But then again, you lose capacity during wet weather events. So it's a tightrope, but we are noticing that that's eating up a lot of our staff time, just babysitting some of these higher maintenance lines.
As far as the accelerated root control, we have not seen any adverse impacts of the chemicals coming down to the treatment plants. Have you?
No, the root control program, we keep in communication with the vendor that provides that service, and so they'll notify us whenever they start doing the root foaming, and we haven't seen any negative impacts. They've been, they provide us SDSs, safety data sheets, and chemical composition sheets, so we keep tabs on it, but we haven't seen any negative impacts or any bypass or pass through or bleed through of that chemical through the process.
And I guess if you were to find a problem, it would be with the biological processes that would get interrupted.
That would be our guess. That's our
Yeah.
main concern, is protecting the biological processes.
So the future of the collection system, staff development and training. I can't emphasize that enough. Over 70% of our staff is under 2 years' experience. So development and training is crucial right now. And so that will be our high priority, safety and development of training of our staff. Development of our CCTV program. I've mentioned this quite a bit before, but really that'll give us the eyes and we can, that will help us determine what is the necessary repair for a certain area. So we can use that in our smoke testing, or we can use it for all different types of items. I just wanted to go over our revised CCTV program real quick. So on your left is this 3-year small diameter CCTV program, and that's what's currently going on, and that'll get us to a baseline. On your right is the ongoing 5-year program that will be implemented. So each area is on its own year of being CCTV'd. So this makes sure that our entire system is CCTV'd every 5 years. So we are up to date in our data, which will help us make better decisions and better priority lists for our for our capital improvement program. And what that really goes into is it helps our CCTV. Sorry, you're throwing me off. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. This also helps our revised cleaning programs. And we would really like to, as stated before, move to that basin cleaning approach and really make it more of systematic instead of reactive. Other capacity programs, we're addressing the capacity, and by that, as Thomas mentioned before, we're implementing more smoke testing. And we are lucky that we did our I&I. We had a bunch of flow monitoring within our system, so our model is up to date, and we're able to use that with our smoke testing, and helps with our maintenance repairs and our capital CIP.
So I just wanted to add to the staff development and training, as Ms. Leslie was mentioning. We had a lot of turnover in the collections, particularly in the collections group. And it's really challenging to maintain a system of this complexity with that kind of turnover. And we recently have looked, and we are about 17% below market on what we're paying our collections operators, which is compounding that issue. Obviously, the commute, the housing situation, it's a really difficult situation, and we are working to try and address that, but it's really complicated, and it's compounding again morale when you have you're training someone and getting them up to speed, and then of course they leave because they find a job where they either get paid better or they don't have a commute or they can buy a home. It just, again, is an issue across the board for the city, but in particular areas, distribution and collections are really impacted at a magnified sense there, because they tend to be more entry-level positions, and they do require, it's equivalent to kind of a college degree. It typically takes 4 to 5 years to get staff to a point where they can operate independently and have the certifications to do that. So just sharing with you some of the challenges we're going through, and I appreciate all the work of our collection staff to try and mitigate that as much as possible.
One more thing I wanted to highlight is we did have our, I think it's coming up. There we go. Here is our new mapping page, and that this is tells you everything you need to know about our collection system. And if you want to go more information about your sewer lateral program, the wastewater collection system, this is now turned on and is available, and we have a QR code and the link in it, and it's just a little story map of our wastewater collection system in our operations and maintenance program. So everything you need to know about chemical root control, whatever, and so where we're going to be applying it this year, all of the maps that go along with it. So we will be updating this annually, and it's a really great tool for us. We are able to get our GIS team to correspond with all of our up-to-date projects, our CIP projects, and our operations projects. So that's very exciting. That's all our slip cases. Okay. Now moving on to our capital improvement projects.
Just before we move on to the next one, two things. One, the QR code, I tried it right away and it works and it looks great on the phone, and that's a really powerful tool to be keeping the public informed, and it's really nicely done. The other, just on that 17% below market, is entirely unacceptable. And I just want to say that it's really important. I'm glad that you bring that up, and I know I've asked about that different times at Water Commission, and we have this class and comp study happening, but some areas are so far out of alignment that they need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And I think it's really, I want to thank you for mentioning it during this presentation, because I think it's something that many people aren't aware of, that those who are keeping the city literally running and the toilets flushing and water flowing need to be compensated. So just want to mention that.
Okay, next is our capital improvement projects. I have here Miss Ashley Shu. She's our principal manager for water resources, and she helps me quite a bit in not only the capital improvement projects, but really after the storm, we're moving more into O&M. And we're really needing engineers' help, especially in our collection system. And we're working hand to hand to try to address a lot of these I&I problems. So helping out with the smoke testing. And also CCTV is finding a lot of gems that need addressed right away. And so being able to pull somebody off of her team to help address those right away, because they're not going to wait for a capital improvement projects. We need to get on them, has been invaluable. And I just want to appreciate her and her team. And probably we'll see the capital improvement maybe go down a little bit, because we are responding a little bit more and being a little bit more reactive with the CCTV and finding all those good gems out there that we have been missing. But this year, we had our same annual rehab project, and we also had our wastewater model update, and that will really help us, along with the CCTV, guide us in our smoke testing and addressing a lot of these I&I issues that Thomas is experiencing down the stream. Two projects, excuse me, digester cleaning and rehab. Those are in green because those are completed. Oh my God, I have a tickle in my throat. Excuse me, I have a tickle. Our chlorine contact chamber rehabilitation, that's in design. We hopefully will be finishing that design this year and going out to bid. Braemar, we're in construction, believe it or not. Yay! What I want to highlight is, although we have these CIPs, it is a hand-in-hand operation with our operations staff and the contractor. We can't shut down, so we are constantly with them and support them the entire time. These are some of our recycled water pump station project pictures. And the next slide will show some digesters. Thomas, do you want to highlight any of your team?
So this is all the contractor in the photos, but like Amanda said, all of our capital work in plant is while the plant's running. So coordination and sequencing with our contractors is really critical. When we rehabbed the distribution pump station, it was pump by pump. And this is included some photos of it because these are pumps that, the pump's all underground. It's in a can, so it's not something that is easily seen. So I wanted to make sure that was documented for you. You can go next slide. And here's the inside of one of our 2 anaerobic digesters. These are 700,000 gallon tanks that are sealed. We have an anaerobic bacteria digesting it and they're producing a methane gas. So you never get to see inside. We only open these up every 6 to 8 years. So I just wanted to point that out for everybody. And really the success of that project had to do with the coordination with the contractor and the operations, because we were down on 1 digester while we had half our capacity down. So we had 1 digester down out of our 2 for pretty much an entire year.
A question? Out of plain curiosity, in the absence of oxygen, what is wearing, causing wear on the digesters, the anaerobic digesters? Is
Yes.
it just physical contact with material coming in?
So there's still corrosion occurring even without the oxygen present. There's hydrogen sulfide in the gas, and just having the presence of the liquid, there's action happening on all the mechanical equipment. So because the tanks are full, there's a lot of valves that allow us to move flow in and out of the tanks. We replaced all the valves as part of this project that are attached to the tank, because the only way to get to those, if you remove the valve, you're draining a 700,000 gallon tank. So, and you can see on the middle photo, there's a yellow coating, and so that's a urethane coating only for the gas space, because we do get corrosion in the gas space. The concrete walls are bare going down, and they're stained with material, but the concrete doesn't get as much corrosion as long as it's submerged.
Thank you.
Okay, upcoming. Of course, in our collections, we'll have our annual rehab project, and we'll have our I&I update. But for the most part, collections, we are going to be really focusing on smoke testing and repairing a lot of our emergency items that may come up. Treatment, Braemar Lift Station, that's going to be in construction. And electrical renewal, we just received bids and we're reviewing them now. So that project, you'll be seeing that in the next few months for award of contract. And the CCC rehabilitation construction, that will go out for construction early next year. And so you'll see that construction for you guys as well. And I think that's about it, if you guys have any additional questions.
Any questions? Well, thank you both so much for the presentation. Just incredible work happening all around.
Madam Chair, I'd just say, again, I found this report really to be very readable. It was a really well-done report, written report. And again, I appreciate it. Again, over the years, I don't think I've appreciated as much as this particular report actually pulled out a lot of the activities in a way that is essentially, for me, was very educational. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. We work on it quite a bit and try to revise it to make it readable and more presentable and to understand what it is, the data that you're looking at. So we're always trying to fine tune it. So we appreciate that
A
comment.
success.
Is there any public comment?
I see no hands raised.
Thank you both. We'll go ahead and move on then to the next item, which is the water affordability study status update.
Vice Chair, we have a very interesting presentation today. I kind of set the stage as Ms. Cook gets settled. this is a check-in. We've collected a lot of information so far, still have a lot of work to be done to kind of process and come up with some recommendations. But I felt like it was a good time to check in with you. Also, we wanted to kind of plug an upcoming public meeting that we're going to be having. So anyway, we welcome your feedback today. We really want to make sure that when we do come back to you, probably sometime in the January timeframe, we will have something that meets your satisfaction and hopefully will put us in a good position to talk rates. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Cook.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hagmark, you stole a lot of my thunder there, but that's okay. So we are conducting a water affordability and conservation study with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. As Mr. Hagmark mentioned, we are in the beginning phase, so we are looking for some feedback and input from you guys that would be helpful. And we do have a public event on November 2nd. I do want to plug that. We are going to engage with our low-income stakeholders, with local advocacy groups, and we are also coordinating with community development. And we have Maria Schroeder, in the audience here, as well as she is the housing program specialist for affordable housing. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce Liesl Hands from AWE.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for your time today and looking forward to the conversation. I'm Liesl Hans. I'm the Director of Programs with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So feel free to head to the next slide. Let me see if I can, if you have slides up. I can't see them on my end. I don't know. Oh, there we go. I can see now. Perfect. Thank you so much. So this is a little bit about what we'll cover. We'll ground the group with some basics on water affordability, and we'll jump into some of the initial results so that you can get familiar with the methodology, the types of analysis we've started, and what's still to come in the work that we're going to do. We'll talk more about our community engagement approach and end with an overview of what's still to come and the timeline we're expecting. So I suspect y'all are an engaged group, and today's commission overall agenda is such a great set of topics. So feel free to jump in and ask questions anytime. Really excited to hear your input and what you're curious to learn more about as we conduct this study. Next slide, please. So let's jump to the next one. We've got all these little placeholders as reminders. The Alliance for Water Efficiency, we're a nonprofit, we're stakeholder-based, and we're dedicated to the efficient and sustainable use of water. We were created for and driven by all of the wonderful folks and organizations in the industries that help us achieve more sustainable water outcomes. So I like to think of our work in three buckets: collaboration-focused, knowledge-focused, and change. And this study fits, of course, well into the work that we do to advance knowledge and research and provide technical assistance to our members and the many communities that are working hard in the various spaces that overlap with water conservation. Next slide, please. A little bit about our team that's working on this project. You see myself there. I'm also joined today by Amanda, who will be talking a little bit about our stakeholder engagement strategies, and then Andrew, who's not joining us today, but he's also working on some of the background pieces of this project. Just put some faces to the names. So next slide. So I'll just touch briefly on the scope of work. If you'll go to the next slide. Here's the kind of core components of the study, just so you have a preview of what will eventually be coming in a fuller report. This study is pretty cool compared to, well, they're all cool. I'm not going to pick favorites, but I like that this study is unique in a few key ways compared to some other studies that we've done, and we're excited about it. This one, we're bringing in a focus on multifamily. Many communities have some challenges with data availability and have focused solely kind of on the single-family residential sector. And Santa Barbara is really committed to understanding the full residential sector, and so we're also looking at multifamily. We're also having the opportunity to explore some coordination with the rate study that will be going on. So I'll be staying on and listening to some of the kickoff, and we've got some meetings coming up with that group. So, and then of course the stakeholder piece. Sometimes we do studies and we sort of work directly with staff, and that's the extent of it, the extent of the technical assistance, whereas this one we're getting to participant and stakeholder engagement, and I love that aspect of it, and I worked in local government for many years, so happy to see that this is a priority for the city of Santa Barbara. So next slide. So water affordability indicators, such as the household burden indicator, which we'll talk more about and what we use in our studies, can be used to thinking as a way to approximate the number of customers that might be struggling to pay bills and identify where these customers and residents are concentrated. And this information can be used to create or refine water affordability programs or direct targeted outreach to help connect them with resources that might be valuable to them. And the cost of water, really, it matters a lot to some households. It doesn't matter a whole lot to some households, but there are some households where it matters a lot. And the issue of affordability, incorporating equity into the work that we do, is getting a lot of attention and is increasingly required of the work that we do in water utilities. And you all have a chance to play a positive role. So let's talk about what water affordability looks like. I see a little bit of funky overlap, but you guys get it. So water affordability has many different definitions. Here's one example that's from the State Water Resources Control Board. You see the different scales that are involved here. I'm getting over a cold. So they're all interconnected, these different scales of how we might look at affordability. This particular study and the focus that we're looking at is looking at household affordability, which sometimes the definitions can get conflated with these other definitions, but we're really looking at individual households, digging into how residents are feeling the burden potentially of water and sewer bills. So the cool thing about this is it's all connected. So as folks and communities are focused on community affordability or water system financial capacity, the benefits of making good choices in that space can also then impact overall rates and, of course, household affordability. So I'm going to keep cruising along here. Next slide, please. This is just an image also from a similar report from California Water Boards, just showing some interconnectivity and some places of potential tension as we're addressing affordability and equity, as well as just the general sustainability of our systems, of course. Next slide, please. So a little bit of grounding of what's happening in California. Of course, we have AB 685 and 401. So 685 is that Californians have a right to safe water. This is to ensure universal access to water, declaring that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. We know water is increasingly more expensive to deliver. There's a lot that goes into it. You saw all of that from the wastewater side. And then, of course, there's even more on the drinking water side of it. And the result of that reality is that more low-income households have the potential to be experiencing unaffordable drinking water. 401 is looking more at assisting low-income households in affording their drinking water, and it's one component of that human right to water in full. So I won't go further into that, but there's been a lot of work on this, and they've been doing these annual affordability assessments, which started first with the singular metric of a % of median household income. So how much a basic water service, how much is that relative to your total household income over the course of the year? Is it 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? That sort of thing. That's focused on a median household income, and I'll talk more about in a moment. You can see the other metrics that they brought in the other years, in the more recent years. They moved away from shutoffs, in part because nobody was doing shutoffs for a couple of years. As more communities are bringing that tool back on, I'll be curious to see if they bring that in as a metric. Next slide, please. So this, just to put in context of what that looks like for Santa Barbara, I did some quick back of the envelope here. So % of median household income. So I took, they use 600 cubic feet as the amount of basic household water use for the metric that they calculated. So we did that here for Santa Barbara and the current rates, as well as what the current median household income that I could find. So that's at about 1.1%. So it's lower than what the state threshold is. Extreme water bill is one of the other metrics that they look at. And this is looking at kind of how big that is relative to the state average. So looking across the whole state, is your community sort of out of whack relative to that average? And this puts it about a little less than that. And Santa Barbara shutoffs are, of course, less than 10%. I don't have the exact number, but we've been working on some of that data, and it is less than 10%. So just for context of how it compares. Next slide, please. So CPUC.
Just a second, Lisa.
Oh, go for it, yes.
There's a question.
Sure, yeah, thank you for stopping me.
Do you prefer questions on the slide as it comes or saving them?
Let's just do that, yeah.
Okay. So on that last slide, I just want to make sure I understand the extreme water bill, or the takeaway from that. the low bills are lower than the state average, but the extreme water bills, is that usage is higher, or the payment or the cost for that usage is higher for the
So in
extreme?
this,
Yeah.
sure. So in this particular case, they're trying to look at communities where the bill at that 600 cubic feet, how does it compare to a statewide average? And so it would flag it as, it would give it different points contributing to this overall sort of metric about affordability. And it would give it points if it was at 150% of the average, and then even more points if it was at 200% or greater than the average. And so in Santa Barbara, it doesn't meet either of those metrics. While it is higher than the average, it doesn't meet the criteria for being an extreme water bill.
Thank you so much.
I had a question too about how the 6 HCF was selected.
The 6 HCF is selected. It's approximately 50 gallons per person per day for a family of 3 people in a household. So that was selected by the state. It's also used by the California PUC, which I'll talk about here in a moment, of the metrics that they use. So it was assessed as a reasonable amount of basic water services for a common number of people in a household. So it doesn't always match what everybody experiences in their home.
Thank you.
So also just wanted to add to this, we have not shut off anybody's water since March of 2020. Now we have reinstated penalties, and of course, if someone's bill now is, I think it's 90 days or 120 days past due, then we will shut 60 days past due. We will shut water off, but we have not been doing that for the last few years.
I've got a question too, if you don't mind, and this just popped into my head. I guess this comes from the State Water Resources Control Board?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's the rationale behind looking at a statewide average comparison versus something that's more regional, where you have different factors at play than you would in other parts of the state?
That's a good question. I can't exactly speak for what the state rationale was in this space. My guess is it's to some extent trying to create some sort of metric that can help provide an indicator of communities that might have greater water affordability challenges, recognizing that there's lots of other details and factors that go into the nuance of what the real experiences are in that community. But it's a way of providing some initial indicators, and then the combination of these 3 indicators, which they're modifying year to year as they're assessing more and learning more about this space. So it's just a way of, based on the information that is available and is easy to get across the state, relatively easy to get across the state, a way of kind of pointing, and similar to the work that we're going to show you, it doesn't necessarily mean that these are the only places that you should focus or that this is the only data that matters. It's a way of providing some indicators of where to go and where to focus.
So Commissioner Keller, Young, your point being that maybe particularly here, people are spending a lot more on rent per se, and so does that change? Is that kind of where you're going with compared to like a state average where maybe rent may be $1,000 here, they're paying $2,000 or more? So is this a metric comparable? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
No.
Okay.
My thought was just the cost of water is different throughout the state, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and I think this was kind of, trying to capture of your income, how much is going towards that water, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But none of these metrics are perfect. This is a work in progress, and the space is evolving quite a bit in terms of how we're thinking about water affordability. And what I'll point out, especially around this median household income, is that's looking at kind of the middle of your community. So the median is, right smack dab in the middle of all incomes in your community. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the folks that are most vulnerable in your community. And so I'll talk a bit about more of that on the next slide in the coming work that we're going to focus on. So maybe so CPUC similarly is working on efforts for regulated utility space, and they've been focusing on this and exploring how to define affordability, what that essential service level is. They also selected the 6 HCF, and they've adopted 3 affordability metrics that they're using to evaluate the communities within their purview. So you'll see those 3 on the right. I won't talk about all of them, but I'll point out the top one, which they're calling the affordability ratio. You'll notice it also focuses on the essential services bill at the top, but on the bottom, the denominator, instead of median household income, you'll see they call it household income, but the little blurb below it talks about that they're actually using the 20th percentile of income, which is approach that we're focusing on here too. And it also incorporates in their particular metric a measure of what basic household other expenses are. So, housing, other utilities that are considered sort of basic, standard, essential components of life. And so taking that out, recognizing you have all these other expenses to pay, and then of your income that's left over, how much of that is going to your essential water services bill. So I think is an interesting take on that approach and is more in line with what the larger industry is moving toward. And then you'll see a couple other metrics here, which are common, like using minimum wage to help. It's sometimes a more intuitive way to think about it. How many hours and the community's minimum wage amount would you have to work to be able to afford the water bill? And then the bottom one is looking at metrics that to some extent don't necessarily have anything to do with water or the cost of water, but reflect the larger sort of challenges potentially in the community. One of which is poverty prevalence, which we're going to incorporate into our study. But because we're working on this in California, we might bring some of this additional data in there since it exists. So just to give you a sense of what else is going on. So in general, the industry has been trying to advocate for moving away from median household income. It's been the long-standing way of assessing the impact. It's been largely in the context of sort of major investments in a community, and it's over time kind of gotten conflated with a measure of household affordability. But the way that this is moving is looking at those either essential water services or an average water and sewer services as a function of the 20th percentile of annual household income. And there's a couple of very, very big reports that have been looking at the different metrics and advocating for these new approaches. So the idea is that if it's at least affordable at a certain income level, then you kind of make the assumption that beyond that, at income levels higher than that, then it's reasonably affordable. But if at that income level it's not affordable, then there might be some work to be done, or assistance programs to approach. You can't magically change the cost of what it costs to do the work that you're all doing, but what can you do to help those customers in light of that? And so this is done at the census tract level. We're not coming up with a singular metric for the entire community. We're digging into more granular data so that you have a better sense of where there are likely to be more concentrated impacts across the community, and really looking at an initial way to look at the most vulnerable segments of the population. So this is most similar to that affordability ratio, although it doesn't bring in those other household expenses.
And we have a question.
I just had a clarifying question. So this indicator includes sewer bills. Is that something that's included in this study, or is this just focused on water bills?
This is both. We've been, you'll see in a bit here, water and sewer. And then because your bills also include a trash component, we've incorporated that as an additional way a lens to look at household burden of the full utility bill that households are facing. So we've done both. And ideally, in the most perfect world, the entire basic water cost would also include stormwater costs, because that's also a cost that many households face across the country and sometimes can't do anything about in most cases. So, but for this purpose and the purview of this community, that's what we're focusing on.
Thank you.
All right. Let's get one moment here. Let me get it coughed out. All right, let's jump into this. So a water affordability analysis. So let's talk a little bit about census tracts, just to kind of ground you on what the unit of analysis is going to look like for some of the work that we do. Census tracts are these smaller units that have been around for a long time with census and data collection across the U.S. So they're relatively permanent. Over time, they get evaluated, I think, every 10 years. Anyway, they're about 4,000-ish people. So it's a reasonable amount of people to get reasonable confidence in the census data that's reflected at each unit. So this particular example is showing the percent of owner-occupied housing units. So the darker the color, the more owner-occupied housing units. So imagine this does not come as a surprise. The numbers that you see, like 5.01, 3.02, those are the census tract labels. So that's the number associated with that particular census tract. And you'll see some of those similar numbers reflected in some of the other graphs that we show later. So next slide. So how do we actually go about calculating that household burden indicator, and what data are we using to contribute to that calculation? I just wanted to walk you all through this. So next slide. So in a given census tract, there's a whole bunch of different households in there. You all have provided billing and consumption data to us for that, for each month for 6 fiscal years. And so we collect all of that data, and then we bring in data for that census tract from the census data. Next slide, please. And then to walk you through a sample calculation. So we gather and clean that billing data. So within that census tract, there's going to be a mix of single family homes, which are individually metered multifamily units, as well as master metered multifamily type buildings. And so for, the single family and the individually metered multifamily, we have their individual bills. These are made up numbers, but annual bills, for example. Whereas in the master meter, what we do is we collect all of the bills for the associated complex and divide it by the number of dwelling units to get individual approximate bills per dwelling unit. So step 2, we take all of the annual bills within that census tract for all the households based on the billing data that we have, and we divide it by the total number of dwelling units in the census tract. And the Santa Barbara data really actually enables us to be able to do this analysis and incorporate the multifamily data, because you all have that in data track. Not all communities do. So kudos to you all for enabling this and allowing us to dig into this too and treat all residential within the study. And then step 3, step 2 gives us an average bill per dwelling unit within the census tract. And then we divide it by the census data, which gives us that upper boundary of your 20th percentile of income. And that's what generates your HBI, which is, you'll get a number, you kind of think about it as a percentage. So next slide. If we look across the 6 fiscal years that we have data for.
Lisa, sorry,
Sure.
can we pause for questions?
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. This is an incredible and granular analysis, which I really appreciate. Back on the slide before this one, could you say again what this is, what the color bars are, and what the white zone with the black dots?
Yeah, this is just for illustrative purposes alone. So the different colors that you see loosely reflect where the census tracts are. I just pulled this from a different map that we have from other data. This is just to sort of reflect, like, here's a census tract. Within the census tract, we have houses, dwelling units, multifamily, some single family. So it's more for an illustrative. The different colors don't really mean anything for the context of this presentation.
Okay, thank you. So that it's not the darker color is more burdened or, okay, thank you.
No, we're not there yet.
And I had a follow-up question on the sample calculation slide, which I think is the next one. Yeah, sorry, can you just clarify what the $3 figures are within each of the housing classes?
These are just examples to illustrate within single family, we know the actual water usage and the actual bill associated with that individual household. The same for individually metered, so these are just sample numbers. Whereas master metered, we don't know the individual units consumption and bills because it's master metered. And so we have to average across all of the dwelling units within master metered multifamily buildings.
Got
So
it.
it's just an example.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on this before we continue?
I think we're good. We can continue.
So here's, you'll see a little draft up in the corner. This is just to indicate that this work is ongoing. And part of the point of being here is to get your feedback on all of this. So these are a few nuggets. This is the HBI for the average across all of the census tracts that we've assessed the data for across the different fiscal years. And so the darker blue is the HBI for water and sewer costs, whereas the full HBI, you get a little more at the top that includes the trash costs that are part of the utility bills. So what does this translate to? How to think about this? So if we use the one for fiscal year 23, 4.8, the overall HBI for both water, sewer, and then trash, means that households at the 20th percentile of income, which is about 45,000 on average across the different census tracts, are paying almost 5% of their annual income to water, sewer, and trash services. Again, these are averaging across averages effectively, but it gives you kind of an overall metric for your community. And you can see the difference of what the water and sewer component is versus that additional bump contributed by the trash services.
Question on this, do you have the breakdown between water and sewer as well, or are those combined?
So right now combined, but if that would be of interest for the study and the final report, we could certainly look at incorporating some graphics and results that show the breakdown.
I think that would be helpful, especially as we're considering the rate studies.
Great. Other thoughts on this?
I think that's it for now. Thanks.
All right. So next, we're going to give you a few nuggets where we will have a lot of this portrayed in a map format, and these are just some initial nuggets to whet your appetite on this. So what you can see on the left is the average water and sewer bills. This is fiscal year 19, just as an example. The darker blue means higher water and sewer bills, so higher water usage. So you can see where that's concentrated, probably unsurprising to you all. Whereas on the right-hand side, you see what the HBI looks like in 2019 across these different census tracts. And so you can get a more granular look at where the higher HBI is concentrated in the community, and it is not necessarily correlated with higher water usage. So it's, again, HBI is a function of both water usage and income. And you can see that it's not, and we've seen this across other communities. These two pieces typically aren't correlated. Next slide, please. So if we get into the individual tracts, this one is looking at, again, average water and sewer bills across each individual tract. This is fiscal year 19 again, and it's just ordered in terms of descending average water and sewer bills. So you can see at the highest, we're over 3,000 for annual water and sewer bills, whereas down below we're like, I think it's like 500 or something like that. And then the line that you're seeing is the upper bound of the lowest quintile of income, that 20th percentile of income. So there's a general trend that shows that higher water and sewer bills, higher water use is correlated with income levels, but not necessarily. So there's a little bit of jolting and jumping around, but just to give you a sense of what the data looks like in your community. Next slide, please. And then this is actually looking at the HBI, the individual. So it was kind of summarized in that map and amalgamated by different groupings. So you can see the actual breakdown for fiscal year 19 by tract. And this is ordered. This is not the same order as the previous slide in terms of tracts, but this is ordered in ascending HBI. And so you can see, and then I've got the averages thrown in there, so it's an easy look. So there's quite a few that are kind of hovering around the average, but then you see some that are quite low. Those are typically your very higher income census tracts. And then you see where you have some concentration in terms of higher census tract and how high it gets. So in fiscal year 19, some of those tracts get up to like 7% of their annual income is going toward water and sewer costs. And again, that's at the 20th percentile. So you can imagine that folks that are earning it less than that are even further burdened. Sometimes utilities don't like to use the word burden, but are paying more of their income toward water and sewer bills. And then the dots just show, sorry, go back real quick. I just want to clarify what those dots are as what percentage of dwelling units are single family. So this is mostly to show that it's not only concentrated. The household burden indicator is not necessarily correlated with where you have more multifamily units. So we can keep going. So this will be a forthcoming analysis. Here's a nugget from our work that we did with Houston, Texas. But part of this methodology that's been advocated for in the greater industry is bringing in, kind of like CPUC did, of bringing not only some of this metric around the HBI or some sort of indicator like that, but also bringing in other data to reflect the reality of the community that has nothing to do with water and sewer costs. So in this particular example, and the methodology incorporates poverty prevalence, and then you bring those two pieces of information together to be able to develop these qualitative descriptors. So in some ways that makes it a little bit easier to communicate, or an additional tool to communicate about where concentrated. So scaling from very low burden or low burden up to very high burden. So that very high burden would be census tracts where you have greater than, 10% HBI. So 10% or more of their income is going to water and sewer bills on average, and then greater than 35% poverty prevalence in that particular census tract. So being able to bring in, these are especially vulnerable areas of your community. So that would be forthcoming analysis, just to give you a sense of what else will be coming to you eventually. Next slide. And then we are looking at a variety of ways to slice and splice the data to help provide some additional insight into what's going on in your community, both in terms of water usage and bills, and just better understand the community and the data. So here's a few examples. Would love to hear more about what you'd like to see. You'll see each slide, each of the next, I think we've got 3 slides total, break out the community into 2 different groups, and then we do a statistical test to compare the difference. And so in this particular case, we're looking at higher census, relatively higher income census tracts. So tracts where the 20th percentile of income level is more than 45,000 versus tracts where it's 45,000 or less. And so you can see there's a notable difference in average annual water use, and I put the little translation to monthly, so for reference there. And so water usage is lower in these particular census tracts. Next slide. This is looking at single family versus multifamily dwelling units. That multifamily includes both the individually and master metered accounts. And so you see quite a big difference there. Some of this is, of course, outdoor usage and bigger lots, bigger homes. But just to give you some initial sense of what this is. And then the third one is just looking at census tracts. This is looking again at the tract level of census tracts where 50% or more of dwelling units are single family versus those where it's less than 50% are single family. And this is a smaller difference in part because you've got mixed realities in each of these census tracts, but you can still see that water usage is lower where there's more multifamily. So I'll pause there. Thoughts, questions, things you'd love to see.
So with the these sample water use analyses, is the intention then that you would add the affordability metric into these tables, or then how does the affordability piece come in here?
So the study that we're working on is really bringing, kind of merging lots of different pieces of data. So it's the affordability piece, also bringing in water conservation, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And so that's where understanding kind of overall water usage can come into both the affordability and the water conservation piece. On the water conservation side, it can help us understand kind of what the capacity is and what the potential is to help those with higher affordability challenges leverage water conservation as a potential strategy to ease that burden. And then on the affordability side and sort of the rate side is understanding, based on this water usage, what does actual water usage look like relative to the rate structure, and maybe how the rate structure can be helping ease affordability challenges. And for example, when we looked at the City of Houston, they have a conservation credit that's at 3,000 gallons, and there's quite a great financial benefit to using less than 3,000 gallons. But relatively few households in their community were using less than that and didn't have great information about how to know if they're using less than that. So that was a piece of information that then we could provide a recommendation about this is something you might want to incorporate when you're thinking about setting your rate structures or providing information to your community members when there is, a financial benefit that can help with affordability challenges.
Got it. Okay, yeah, it would be interesting to see if you were to compare, our looking at this, kind of organizing it by water use, like our lower water users, do they tend to be more cost burdened or less cost burdened, and compared to higher water users, kind of what that looks like. We have this general assumption, right? And you showed this, I think, on one of the charts, that typically water use is somewhat, correlated to income, but looking at that comparison between water use and the household burden indicator would be interesting.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Other questions or comments at this time? Looks like she's got some more. Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Keep cruising then. So we'll have additional data. So we know that in addition to the poverty prevalence, there's other aspects of your community that would be valuable for you all to know how it's correlated and connected with the water usage the relative cost burden. So we're going to bring in some additional information like that, understanding of where we have owner-occupied units, renter-occupied, because we know renter-occupied presents a whole suite of other challenges in helping improve affordability challenges potentially there. Understanding sort of race and ethnicity. Obviously, there's a large Spanish-speaking population and Hispanic population in the community. So understanding if that's at all correlated with potential challenges, where you might have older households that might have more limited or what's the right word? Stable incomes that as those water costs rise up, their incomes might not necessarily be going up with those, and so they might be more vulnerable. And then other data that we have that's interesting. Plus, we're going to be working on understanding where there have been concentrations of disconnects when y'all were doing disconnections, and then where at least currently folks are on payment plans to help understand where these different populations are concentrated relative to some of where we're seeing the concentrations of cost burden.
Question on that, and it's connected to the disconnections and payment plans. Is it possible to also incorporate the LEWAP participation into this assessment?
We could on our end if the data is available, for sure.
Do we know if the data is available?
We have some data available. We can provide that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So I'll give you just a brief overview of how we think about water conservation in this context. So next slide. We know that water conservation strategies can contribute to generate sustained water demand reductions, which for individual households can help with lower water bills. We know that low-income households can face some significant barriers. They might not have the upfront capital to pay for a new appliance, even though they might then benefit in lower water bills. Finding a plumber, paying for a plumber, all of that can get very expensive, on top of that these households sometimes are very time burdened on top of sort of cost burden. And so utilities might need to explore different approaches to ensure that the programs make sense and are accessible to all populations that you want to support. And so we're going to be looking at how different water conservation strategies could potentially ease the household burden indicator, and then we'll be talking a bit about how those strategies might actually need to show up differently for different populations. So next slide, I think, just gives some examples. These are from a Long Beach study and a City of Houston, Texas study that we did. Just to give you a sense, we look at different strategies. And in Houston, we parsed it out by the potential for supporting households who have outdoor water use versus those who mostly have indoor water use. And we might do a similar thing here where we're looking at maybe single family versus multifamily opportunities. Anyway, but it outlines kind of what a general theoretical sense of what the potential is for reducing those and therefore lowering and easing that HBI. So this is forthcoming, but just to give you a sense of what else we'll be working on as part of this study. And then I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who's going to talk about our stakeholder engagement efforts.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm Amanda. I'm project coordinator with AWE. I'm actually located in San Luis Obispo, so not too far from you all. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit of what we've been working on, and also more broadly, thank you for prioritizing this important issue in your city. So just want to share a little bit more about our stakeholder engagement, as Lisa mentioned. So for the strategy, we wanted to utilize the lens developed in the city's Water Vision Santa Barbara effort that was taken on as a part of the 2020 Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan. And as you can see from these pictures throughout the Water Vision's various workshops and meetings, stakeholders and community members who participated expressed ideas of equity, conservation, and affordability as key community values as it relates to water. And so we're hoping that this study may serve as a continuation of that conversation and really a response the city is taking to amplify and address the concerns and priorities that were voiced from the community then. Next slide. So our goals broadly for engagement are utilizing three main pillars and approaches. So first, we hope to inform the community on our study, the rationale for it, its goals, and what we're hoping to gain from it. We want and intend to listen to the community's experience surrounding water affordability and access challenges, and get their input on the study so that our focus and our findings are really reflective of the community's needs, especially when these issues are such lived experience for most. And lastly, we want to educate the community on our findings so that the community knows what actionable items and next steps are in the city's effort to address water affordability challenges. Next slide. So to meet these goals, we are proposing various avenues for participation throughout the study. So this includes first, an in-person workshop during the study's development, which I will share a little bit more about shortly. Virtual opportunities to provide direct feedback on the draft report later this winter. And lastly, an informational webinar to share findings, outcomes, and next steps from the study. We've also, no worries. We've also worked with the city to develop a web page in both English and Spanish that residents can subscribe to for ongoing project information, updates, and engagement opportunities. And we will share the QR code and link to that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So the Water Affordability Community Workshop, as mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, will be on November 2nd from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Westside Neighborhood Center. In preparation for the workshop, we conducted outreach to the stakeholder group from Water Vision, which was comprised of community leaders from local organizations and groups throughout Santa Barbara. And we did receive initial positive feedback and interest in participation, which is really exciting. We've also developed various materials in coordination with the city to share with the broader community to advertise the workshop through flyers and the webpage as mentioned and some social media posts. We're hoping to be able to engage these more vulnerable communities who may be more susceptible to and impacted by these kind of challenges to really hear from them. This is an opportunity to reconvene and refresh ourselves on the values and pillars developed from Water Vision. We'd also like to have the opportunity to introduce ourselves at AWE to the stakeholders and residents and share background on the affordability study. But really the main focus for this workshop will be creating space and open conversations surrounding the community's experiences, thoughts, and concerns on water affordability and access and conservation challenges more broadly, so that we can use that to inform our study. And then lastly, we'll also share general project next steps and ways to stay involved. I'd like to mention too that we will have Spanish interpretation during the workshop. And for those that are unable to attend in person, we developed a virtual survey in both languages that will be housed on the webpage, which will prompt similar questions that will be discussed in person. Next slide. And some of these questions or prompts include: how do community members feel about water affordability? What challenges or barriers exist? What do community members want to see in services or programs to support water affordability and conservation? And what would the community like to see explored further related to these topics? We know too that, of course, these kinds of lived experiences can be very challenging and sensitive topic for people. So we want to be really intentional to create an open and safe space for sharing during these events. And I'll hand it back over to Lisa if there are any questions though about what I've just shared. Happy to.
Yes, we have
those.
several questions here.
Okay.
Thank you. So just specific to the outreach, will that presentation and the slides be in Spanish?
Yes, I believe we will be translating all the materials for the workshop.
Excellent. Thank you.
And my question is, why not have a workshop on the east side?
This was one of the available spaces that we could use that was affordable for us as well. We didn't want to have it in this room or affiliated with like a city building because we wanted more of that community feel. And so this was a space that could handle the amount of people, the magnitude, the capacity, and that was available.
Do you think one?
Yeah, and I'll add on, sorry.
Do you think?
I'll add on to that. we also had conversations about this space being conducive to a more like group discussion type of room rather than a presentation type of room. So we wanted to facilitate that. And also, this space does have a lot of access to public transportation, which is a big plus for access.
And what about more than one date?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
I'm just going to chime in. I mean, the scope of the study really involved one workshop. And so at this point, that's what we were focusing on. And then providing opportunity for folks to engage through the virtual survey or, of course, we'll have contact on there and folks can reach out to us. I think ideally we would have more, additional sites and opportunities. It's just not within sort of the scope of how the study was laid out from the get-go.
So I would probably preface it as, I want this to be sincere engagement with the community, and I think this would be the first step. We do have some extra scope in this contract that if we find that we're missing folks, or there's a huge turnout and we find that there's more, I would have no hesitation in creating more opportunities there. It's really been tough. We've held a lot of public meetings and it's difficult to get participation. We're excited that we have this foundation with the Urban Water Management Plan and the Water Vision folks, because they represent big pockets of low-income folks in the community, so they are speaking on behalf of a lot. I think we're going to get meaningful engagement here, but I certainly am happy to pivot if we find that we need to do more.
So, just my reaction is this is pretty heavy-duty stuff. I mean, there's a lot of detail here. It takes time to go through it and understand it. I don't have any experience with how the city attempts to ensure participation in workshops, so I don't know what your experience is in terms of what works and what doesn't work. But just my reaction is, one date for 90 minutes. If you didn't get a lot of participation, does that mean that people got the information and just decided I don't need to participate? Or did they not get the information and it just went right by them?
We do have our website that's up right now for the affordable rate study. So we do have more information about the study as well as contact information, and the survey will be up shortly. So we are going to blast that to all of our email contacts within the city and within our advocacy groups as well. So we really want to engage the community as much as possible, and we want to use as many avenues as possible. We do realize that one engagement meeting, well, we haven't really had a lot of participation in the past when we've held our rate study meetings either. So we want to focus it on this one day. We have 2 weeks from now. So we're really putting in all of our effort to get this out. We have our affordable housing. We're meeting with community development. So we're trying to use every avenue within the city to get the word out.
Commissioner Young, you bring up just a great point. I mean, it really is tough. And, speaking from a busy household myself, to find time for public engagement is very difficult. We do hope we're going to get good engagement from the stakeholders from our Urban Water Management Plan. I mean, they were very involved then. They are advocates. They take a lot of information back to their groups. They bring information to us. Really hoping that was successful last time, because, people are just busy. It's hard to get them to these meetings. I don't know if holding multiple meetings will help. Certainly, I think what we've tried to do is create a very diverse opportunity to engage. And so whether you have very little time and you just want to send us an email of your comments, or you want to post something, you want to advocate through one of your member groups, we're trying to create all these opportunities in multiple languages that it's there. And certainly we want to bring that information forward. But this is a tough one. We are challenged, I think, as a city to find the best way to engage and make sure we get meaningful input from our community.
And checking, just picking up on that again, I do have a lot of experience in public outreach, and this is impossible to get public involvement at this level. It's just not going to happen. So I think your experience will be repeated in that regard. I would strongly suggest you use your Water Vision team as much as you can to get that out. And I don't know time-wise, an insert in a water bill, which essentially gets, you can't do that. It's really unfortunate, because again, that's where you're going to reach most people with a touch in that regard. And I'm wondering, and again, you may have touched this, I left the room for just a minute, how this integrates then into our next item in terms of the rate study itself. Because in fact, you're basically coming in and talking about this water burden over here, but then again over here, we're going to be talking about projecting out. At least what I saw is a lot of this information is census information collected in 2019, plus or minus. We were already 3 or 4 years out, and we'll be projecting water rates out for another 3 years, and then you're talking about, again, a 7-year period where incomes have not kept up with the cost of water. So you've got a lot of variables there to play with. I'm just curious as to how this is going to overlap.
Well, no, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Davis, because there are going to be things I'm anticipating. There's going to be things they bring up that just time-wise cannot be implemented as part of this rate-setting cycle, but can lay the ground for us to continue for the next few years to talk about how we incorporate that, because some of these things could be seismic changes to how we approach rates. And of course, always kind of keeping a close eye on where the legal world is on rate development, because that is, well, it's very litigious. And so trying to make sure that we are being proactive, being leaders in this, because I think we have been leaders in rate setting. We offer a pretty unique approach to rates because of our unique water supply situation, where we have the lowest rates on the South Coast, and how we balance that. But yeah, I'm very intrigued to see what they come back with, and again, how we adapt to that, what we can implement as part of this rate study, and what we start to lay the ground for the next rate study.
Yeah, and don't take my comments. I think the information here is so granular, it'll be very good information for us and the council looking at the rate setting that we do in that regard. So I think it's very valuable information, and I appreciate the work that's coming out of the study.
One of the things that's been really challenging for me is, we're looking at, as we talk about essential services, cell phone is now an essential service, internet access, all these things that feed into that total cost. How much, and this is one of the questions I've asked them, how much can we move the needle with just the water bill or the city's utility bill per se? And what are, because the gas company and the electric company have their own programs as well. And at the end of the day, you start to ask, is there a better way to holistically handle these? And I think that brings it back to our community development folks and talking about what other programs are out there to really move the needle to make sure that these essential services are available to our low-income families.
And the study is going to analyze fiscal year 19 through 25, and then we're also going to do some analysis on when we do get further on in our rate study, we will plug in some of those proposed rate increases and see how that affects the HBI.
And I'll just chime in briefly there. Thanks for mentioning that, Gabrielle. Yeah, we'll look at all those years. So the fiscal year 19 stuff that you were seeing in the slides is just sort of nuggets for consideration. We'll be doing that across all of the years. And some of the census data is more updated than that. Not necessarily, it's not all from 2019. And then my other thought on the community engagement piece is, this is hard work and people are very busy. I will note that the workshop as well as the survey is approaching this topic in a way that is more accessible to folks. So we're not going to go in there and necessarily talk them through HBI and all of the census data and all of this nuts and bolts of what we're doing in the study, but we're going to approach it in a perspective of how they're thinking about affordability. So it's much more open-ended. It's very broad strokes types questions that just connect with how the community members might be thinking about and feeling this in their everyday lives. So we're not going to go in there and be like, what do you think about this high HBI and the census tract? We're going to ask them more about how does water costs affect your, day-to-day life, or how does those sorts of things, or have you participated in programs and how did that go? And so connecting in a different way. So, but yes, excited to see what comes out of this first workshop and the survey. And then we'll definitely regroup and see maybe if we need to pivot or adapt or incorporate some additional strategies to get the input we want.
One of the things I really appreciate about this is just multiple layers. Is the city rolled out in June the LEWA program, so our low-income folks can apply for and get assistance with their utility bill. And that's relatively new, and we've been obviously pumping messages about this program. This will be another opportunity to make sure these folks in these agencies know or about this program and continue that along the way. And I think we're just, how do we, approach this from various angles? What is the state saying is affordable? Here are some programs that people can apply for. What else can we do to facilitate? I love the, how can we facilitate improvements in the home that maybe are barriers for some folks. So again, attacking this from many different angles to try and hopefully move the needle.
Yeah.
Sorry, is this time for comments also with questions, or is there more?
I think she has like 2 more slides. She's just going to go over that timescale of how this is rolling out, and then yes, wide open.
Sure. So maybe just next slide, just to show the timeline. And this just walks you through kind of where we're at. We're going to be connecting with the rate study folks this month. We've got the community workshop coming up in the first week of November, so that November 2nd, Thursday. And we'll have the community survey live for a period of time. We'll be communicating more with the rate study folks in November, bringing a good chunk of this content together to be able to deliver a draft report to the city in early December. Some additional potential community engagement strategies based on what happens in the community workshop and what we hear preliminarily through the survey. Getting some feedback from the city on the report that we delivered. We'll be back hopefully with you all again in January and providing some updates of what we've accomplished and what we've learned so far, and then aiming to have a final report in January. And then on our end, of course, as we're able to, being able to share this out, because while our focus here is Santa Barbara, in general, folks are very interested in this topic across the country and want to learn more from what you all are learning too. So it's a great opportunity and a great part about working with AWE. So this is the anticipated timeline, and we'll explore and let you know if anything needs to change along the way. So last slide is just our contact information, the website, and the Y is hanging down at the bottom, but there's the QR code that also gets you there, and we'll take any questions that you have.
Great. Councilmember Seddon.
Thank you. Yeah, so quickly, well, first for the timeline, the November 2nd workshop and then November 3rd check-in, and just the timeline in general, I guess, it seems a little bit compressed, like so much so that we can't be sending something out in the water bill, but maybe between the time, maybe we could send something out in the water bill, like the QR code or the survey or something. It just, I just have, that's first a question about the timeline. Is there a reason that I'm missing for why it's so compressed right there?
It's based on the, it's based on the rates, the rate study. We need to have rates in by June of 2024 for fiscal year 25. And so with all the noticing and backing all those dates up, we want to incorporate the recommendations and findings from this study.
Got it.
Okay. And so we can push it a little bit, but January, February is the timeline that we need to have some recommendations.
Understood.
So yes, I do think that having a QR code being sent in the mail, the inserts, the bill inserts, would be a great idea for November, December, January, so everybody can kind of, November, December, so people can get their input in if they need to.
We have made contact with the representatives from the Urban Water Management Plan, right?
Correct.
Then that date is something that works for them too. Yeah.
Correct.
And really, this is supplemental. It's a lot of census data, bill data, and sort of the outreach is more educational and to get some additional commentary. But really, so much of this particular study is data-driven.
Correct. And we have all the data, and so they're analyzing the data and they're analyzing the data and going to write the report, and then they can add this community portion supplemental to that.
Thank you. And then just have a couple more questions, and these might be more appropriate for the next item, but I'll ask them now and you can decide when or how to answer them. But first, this approach, I love this approach, even looking at cost burden and in different areas and census tracts within the city, the focus on equity, conservation, affordability, and then really looking at the multifamily as granularly as possible. That is our community. So I think that's a fair and good way to be looking at that. My question, and maybe it's for this and maybe it's for later or how to consider it, but it comes up a lot. It came up that many of our staff are 17% below sort of going rate, and then it's always this balance with, well, this is an enterprise fund and any raises would be passed on to ratepayers. And my question is if that paradigm is really necessarily the way it is. Are there things that are being passed on to ratepayers that maybe could be picked up by general fund because there's a genuine nexus between our tourism industry or variability that's beyond the control of our ratepayers, that there might be a justification for that coming from a different fund that may be getting revenue in a different way? And I don't know if it's part of this or part of the larger ratepayer study, but there's this, well, if you're going to pay anybody more, ratepayers are going to have to pay for that, and you're going to be overburdening already cost-burdened members of the community. And so I guess maybe a comment, I don't think it's a question that can be answered in this moment, but through this affordability and the ratepayer study, or the rate study development, I think it's important, and we're at this moment in time where we really need to be looking at that more closely, because I'll just say as a comment, I think it's a little bit of a false narrative that we maybe not are looking fully at how those rates might be offset in different ways. So much more complicated than can be answered here, but it seems to touch on both of these, the affordability and the next item, that I think is an important question.
I appreciate that. I've always approached it as the general fund already has enough pressure on it, but it's a great conversation to ask. I do know, just to give you an example, in Montecito, because they have folks that are on wells, we don't have the situation that they have in this particular case. They have people on wells. They have moved the burden of fire protection through the water system onto the property tax bill. So it's no longer, they don't collect that in the water bill. So they've kind of shifted that. So they got this nice fixed income coming from property tax. And so that's how they've dealt particularly with that. Certainly we can talk about whether or not that helps the situation, or, that ultimately would just get passed along. And then, of course, what, if any, because we've been talking about, the LEWAP program right now is actually being subsidized by the state and feds. I anticipate, and I think when we went down this road, that at some point they're going to pull the funding, and we're going to have to come up with that funding, and there's limitations on what funding sources we can use for that. But that's another opportunity of what we can kind of kick around. Like at this point, they're still getting the program off the ground, but how much that would cost on an annual basis to keep that going and where that comes from. But yeah, I think it comes as no surprise to all of you. There is so much pressure right now. Construction costs are just ballooning, electric, chemical, everything. And so I'm really fearful of where we're headed with our water rates and wastewater rates, and wanting to be as proactive, hopefully, as possible to come up with the best solution that really strikes that balance and makes sure that we keep this essential resource available to all.
Okay, thank you. So this is a very interesting study with a lot of the data that's been generated, and the example max, for example, where you look at bills versus HBI, makes me think that we really have to think about two different type of messages at least in terms of when we do the workshops. If you look at the map, it seems clear that some of the areas on the surrounding parts of the city, the consumption is high, but the income is high. So they have a HBI that's high, but it's more because of conservation issues, and so pushing that, I think, is probably more important in those areas. Whereas if you look at the downtown area, it seems very clear that they already are at low consumption. So conservation may not be the message that, although there's possibly opportunities, it's not the message that they're willing to hear. It's more, what are we doing with the rate? So I think we need to sort of think about that and be sensitive to the fact that some areas may be more affected by rates and others by other measures that could be taken into consideration. So.
I don't know if I should be aware of this because I've been on the city's website many times, but is there a way to have something like this translated into Spanish? Okay.
Yes.
The final report, you mean?
No. I mean,
The
well, yeah,
PowerPoint?
in the final, whatever material information you're going to post as to the workshop.
Yes. So right now we have both English and Spanish website translations available, and everything will be bilingual for this.
Thank you.
Commissioner Davis, did you have any questions? No, okay. I had a lot of questions, but I know we're kind of over time, but I think, let's see. So in regards to the timing, I do think it's worth careful consideration. I think this study is incredibly important, and there's so many great dimensions of it that we want to make sure we explore. And I think, Joshua, you mentioned that like the timeline of actually being able to incorporate the findings from the study into this rate study are, it's very limited, and we may be thinking about really more meaningfully incorporating these findings into the subsequent rate study. And if that is really the case, I think we should maybe consider the timeline and make sure that we're getting, as thorough of a affordability study as we can, so that we have all the robust information to be incorporating it into the next rate study. So I'll just put that out there. I was also thinking, or I was wondering if the Water Commission will have an opportunity to review that draft report in the December timeframe.
Yes, and given the feedback, which I'm not surprised, the commission's really engaged in this topic, which I love. We do have in our roles and responsibilities an opportunity for an ad hoc committee of the Water Commission. And so maybe this is an appropriate opportunity here to maybe assign 2 people from the Water Commission who are really interested in this topic, and we'll take a deeper dive with them, and they'll be part of this process. But the draft will be circulated in advance to the Water Commission, so all will get to see that. But I'll put that out there as a potential option, just given the interest in this topic, which is fantastic. Maybe that would help with the communication and decision-making on this.
I think that would be helpful. I just worried that if we get the draft, a couple days before the Water Commission meeting in January, and then the final report is expected to be sent, a week later or days later, that there won't be time to incorporate commission feedback in that timeframe.
Yeah, I think the whole process along the way, the presentation that's in January is intended to get feedback as well, so that the final is coming after that. We're not going to final it until we've thoroughly had an opportunity for the commission and the community to comment on that. We do want it to obviously reflect that. And I think we need to talk about at what point we engage the full city council in this. I haven't built that into the schedule. It wasn't like I was intending to keep them out, because we're going to be talking about water rates as well. So maybe we can also collaborate and talk about when the best time to engage the council on this, because I think they're going to be very interested in this outcome. Mm-hmm.
Okay, absolutely.
So
Any other
welcome to
questions
feedback
or
on that.
comments on this? No? Is there any public comment?
Not for this item.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Liesl and Amanda. Great presentation and great work today. I look forward to seeing next iterations.
Thank you.
So before we
you.
move on, is there a recommendation for an ad hoc? And if so, who would that be?
I would be interested in being on, surprise, surprise, on an ad hoc committee on this topic. Are there any other commissioners who are interested in that at this time?
Yeah,
Another option would maybe be that this is something that we bring up at our monthly meetings that we have with the chair and vice chair and liaison. That could be maybe a way to approach it. What do you think?
Chair Lindsay's not here. I think she would be. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and I promise we won't overburden you with this as well. This would be something I imagine maybe on a monthly basis, we would be meeting to talk on this as needed. So that give you a sense of the demands on your time, because I know your time is valuable as well.
So if it's a one-person committee, do we still need to
There's
make
nothing
a
wrong with a
motion on
one-person,
that?
no, there's nothing, there's no
That
reason.
works.
That works.
I don't know that it needs to be a formal committee at that point. It probably can just, we will engage with you on that.
Just as vice chair, you could basically, monitor and be an ad hoc member.
If it's chair and vice chair and liaison, we already meet
That's what I was,
Right.
yeah.
monthly and can incorporate that into that
That
update.
works. Yep, that works.
Let's plan for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then I think we're ready to move on to our next administrative item, which is the water and wastewater rate kickoff.
So time check. I love when we have good topics, but I want to be respectful of your time. I have told our next speaker that he has 10 minutes, but I can also, let's see, on the fly agenda management here. The item 6D, we wanted to walk you through there. There's no big decision right now, but we really just wanted to make sure you're aware of this project that's moving forward. I'll leave it to the commission. We could bring this back at a later time. There's the presentation and packet information there if you'd like us to in the sake of time, skip over that.
I know you were seeking a recommendation on that one. Is it possible to move that recommendation to next month, or does that need to happen more?
It needs to happen now, so we can get to council. Yeah, kind of time sensitive on the council item. On that one.
I think if we did 15 minutes on the water rate study and then get to the item,
Okay.
10 minutes, get out of here by 11:30, I'm good by that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We'll move swiftly then.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Gabrielle Cook, Water Resources Financial Officer. We are conducting a water and wastewater rate study this year for hopeful implementation in fiscal year 25. We haven't done those together before, so we're doing both of them together this year. We do anticipate that this is going to be a challenging rate setting process, as Mr. Hagmark has mentioned, because of the inflationary challenges we've been facing, particularly in our capital projects. And so with that is a discussion, I guess, for another day. But today we are going to talk about the rate setting process and how that goes about. And so I'm happy to introduce Mr. Sean Korn from HDR.
Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And in the interest of time, I can probably keep it shorter than what we originally were just talking about. Is the presentation up? I don't see it on my end, so I apologize.
Yes.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So really what we're here to talk about is our water and wastewater rate study. As Gabrielle just noted, we are conducting both the water and wastewater utility concurrently. So as we go through this, we'll be talking about, in general, both components or both utilities and the components that go along with that. So on the next slide, we have kind of the overview, the presentation. We'll talk about the purpose, the key issues, the process, and then talk about schedule and next steps. On the next slide, we'll hit our purpose. You can go one more as well. Our purpose really is to come back and develop a rate study that does a couple of things. One, provides an adequate level of rate revenue to support the operations and capital needs of each of the utilities. Those subsequent rates are cost-based and proportional and meet the requirements of Proposition 218, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in reference to your prior discussion on affordability. And as we do that, we need to develop the analysis meeting our financial planning criteria. So thinking about maintaining adequate debt service coverage ratios, so our legal requirement to maintain revenues at certain levels for existing debt that we have issued, as well as possible future debt. making sure we're adequately reinvesting in the system on an ongoing basis, and then maintaining the council policies on reserve levels. To do that, that's based on our generally accepted methodologies, but it's tailored around each utility's specific customers and characteristics, as we've talked about in the past. On the next slide, we have a couple of our key, it's our overview of our approach. We're on the left-hand side here. We're in the planning phase. We're just getting kicked off. That includes our data collection and review. It's reviewing the financial policies and metrics that we need to look at that we've used in the past for the water and wastewater studies. And then we'll get into that technical analysis and the communication aspect of this with our reports, public presentations, and ultimately the models for city staff to have as part of that. And so, as I mentioned, we're working on the left-hand side here, but ultimately moving into this analysis phase fairly quickly. And then that analysis phase is really where we'll be able to incorporate some or all, depending on the situation and schedule of the prior discussion on affordability, as well as we go through this process for water and wastewater. On the next slide, we have a summary of our process. Remember, to meet our requirements of Proposition 218, we have to develop the cost basis of those rates, the proportionality of those rates, and ultimately design rates to meet that. And that's done through our revenue requirement, our financial plan, so determining what those costs are. Our cost of service, which proportionally allocates and distributes those costs between a residential, a multifamily, a commercial customer for both the water and the wastewater utilities. And then ultimately design our rates to reflect the results of those two studies. So this is where, as we go through this process, we learn more about the affordability challenges, approaches to address those. We really need to start building those into our cost of service analysis, as that becomes the basis for our proposed rates. Now, we do have some ability to carry that into our rate design. So, you know, the big challenge and the one that always comes up is the multifamily situation. How do we deal with those customers? This is, again, and this we've done in the past, you know, looking back at that rate structure for multifamily customers. Are there other ways to develop that rate that would provide a benefit to customers? And how does that impact those customers if they're just paying rent, they don't receive a direct water bill? So that'll be part of that discussion as we go through this as well. So some of the key issues on the next slide some of them have already been mentioned, but really is cost recovery for the water and wastewater utility, coming back for that proportional distribution of costs based on the costs incurred to provide service. So as we go through this, we're kicking off from where your current budgeting and actual costs have been in this last year, and then incorporating those inflationary impacts that we've seen on the O&M side. So you previously discussed some of the salary levels, how that plays into our overall costs, and also Mr. Hagmark noted the increasing cost of capital projects from supply chain issues, backlogs, competition for resources, et cetera. We've seen our costs skyrocket, and it's not a Santa Barbara, it's not a California, it's a, you know, across the country impact that we're seeing for utilities as they try and accommodate the kind of where our new normal is here as we move forward with the costs associated with providing these essential services. The affordability issues, again, we'll talk about and bring that into play as we go through this, as I mentioned, and then we'll talk about our revenue stability and conservation impacts. So how have the characteristics changed more specifically on the water side since our last study? And
Yep, so much for that connection.
Sean, are you still there?
He's frozen.
Yep, we've all been there.
It looks like he's rejoining shortly.
Questions, comments?
Do you know any good jokes? I don't know any good jokes.
I did have some questions. I don't know if we want to wait for Sean to rejoin, and these are kind of higher level, but, so one is just thinking about, and I'm hearing this side conversation about the, like, the rising cost of infrastructure and thinking about the federal infrastructure funding that's available, and the, you know, part of the intention of passing that federal bill was to help offset some of these rising infrastructure costs and the effects that they have on these systems. And I was just wondering if that, like, if there's any options around that that help the rate situation.
Well, I was saving this news for the end, but we just got bids in for the electrical project on Thursday. They are 30% over the engineer's estimate. They are $10 million over what we had expected. And this was, we had already pre-qualified the contractors, so we got down to the list of people that do this on a regular basis, and we felt comfortable that they could pull this off. And so, yeah, we're all kind of scratching our head, and it's, you know, we've seen it on State Street underpass. I mean, this is not unusual. It's just a big project that you're seeing this on. I know Goleta had a big project that also kind of had similar struggles. Yeah. Now, there's an upside to it. This is a state revolving fund loan project, and on this one, we did it 30-year loan on this, so it does spread it out a little further, but and a reasonable interest rate. I don't know if we've locked in yet, but in the
1.66.
1.66. So good interest rate. But yeah, looking for what kind of funds. Typically, we are not the agency. We do not have a lot of low income or infrastructure that has failed. In particular, we're violating our permits. Those tend to be the first folks that are getting a lot of the grants opportunities. So, yeah, but it's on our radar. We are watching and looking for it, and we have been really successful at landing a lot of grants. But
Challenge.
yeah, it's a real challenge. Yeah.
Do we have Sean Bang?
All right, Sean, are you there?
He
Yeah,
hasn't
it's-
rejoined just yet.
Okay. Catastrophic failure. All right, Gabrielle, let's see you
All
bring
right,
it.
let's see how well I know this. Oh, shoot. Okay, how many of these slides do we got? Okay, so we talked about, I think the last thing Sean talked about was the revenue stability and conservation impacts. Our community does a really good job of conserving, so that's usually a pretty stable number there. So moving on to our revenue requirement. We compare our revenues to our expenses to determine the level of rate adjustment necessary. And then we use prudent financial planning criteria for adequate funding of renewal and replacement. We do look for SRF loans, for bond options, grants. We look at everything that we can that we can possibly get, because we understand that these projects are very expensive. And then we also need to maintain our ending reserve balance. That is another topic that we've had pretty in-depth discussions about, is our reserve policy. And then there is a review. We review a specific time period, typically 5 to 10 years. This rate setting process, we typically do 3 years. We're going to look at a 4-year for this one. And
It does kind of give you an opportunity to spread out. If you need to increase costs, you can spread them out over a longer period of time instead of being kind of restrained to 2 years or 3 years. You have a longer runway to get your rates up so that so you may initially dip into reserves, but ultimately end up in a spot where you're matching what your reserve balance is.
And then we also just look at and analyze the revenues and the expenditures on a standalone basis. So no transfer of funds from the general fund or anything like that. We need our rates to support our expenses. And then we utilize the cash basis methodology, which is generally accepted method for municipal utilities. Oh, okay. So our goal is for long-term financial stability. And I see some,
I think Sean may be joining in just 1 second. He's connecting to audio right now.
okay. Well,
I apologize.
I did,
My camera is not working, but I'm back on, so I apologize for that.
we don't need to see you. We just need to hear you. So this is perfect. I kind of went through the last 2 slides, so I don't know if you want me to go back, if you can cover some of those just super briefly.
Or you can just pick up here.
Or just pick up here. Okay, pick up here.
Yeah, no, I think the key thing here on the revenue requirement is really coming back and outlining those overall costs. And then as we work through this with staff and then with the Water Commission, is keying in on some of those key policy discussions. So how are we funding this, right? The discussion we had right at the end of the prior discussion of how are we funding all these needs that we have? You know, are there other funding sources available? How do we meet those? How does that work within the overall city's environment, as well as each of the water and wastewater utilities as part of that? So again, it's just this is establishing the cost basis for the rates that you are allowed to charge, and then it's taking into consideration those other funding sources that may be available short and long term that you can build into this process. So as we move forward onto the cost of service, and we can skip to the next slide, this is really where we need to come back and meet the requirements of Proposition 218. So coming back to our proportional distribution of cost between customer classes, we do this using the AWWA and WEF, the Water Environment Federation, American Water Works Association approaches, but it's unique and specific to your system. So as Joshua spoke about earlier, the stacking of the resources that we have as we develop our proposed water rates, that plays into the overall pricing structure that comes out when we develop the rates. So as we think about our cost of service, again, it's incorporating some of those key elements from the affordability discussion that you just had, and where we can build them into our cost of service to support our overall analysis and come back to a cost-based and proportional method to establish our rates to meet our requirements of Prop 218 while also achieving our goals of our rate design goals and objectives. So on the next slide, we have kind of our summary of our cost of service. Really, our analysis is based on the specific usage and facility requirements of each customer class of each of the 2 utilities. It's going back and looking at the proportionality of those. And I will mention something here as we think about this from a rate setting perspective. When we talk about proportionality or we talk about equity, in the rate setting world, it's really focused on everybody's paying their cost of receiving that service. When we start talking about affordability or social equity, that's a different topic where we need to start layering in these different programs, whether it's a customer assistance program, an outside agency that may help with that, to achieve our social equity or our affordability goals if they're not being able to be met within our legal framework of establishing cost-based and proportional rates. So that's a key element of this as we go through this and try and merge these 2 discussions. It's very appropriate from a timing perspective, as you all mentioned. As we think about how we're developing our rates, the costs increase over time, the impact this has on a specific set of your customers of how we can achieve and provide that service to them in the best manner possible. So this is an analysis that we do each time we establish a cost or rate study. It establishes the new baseline. So we may have a 1-year change, a reset, and then the next 2 years, historically we've adopted rates for 3 years, then we have our across the board adjustment, and then you do another study, and if we need to reset from a cost of service perspective, we can do that. So the city's been very proactive in this manner of establishing and developing cost of service studies to maintain that proportionality within their customer classes. So once we have that revenue requirement and cost of service, we can go on to the rate design, which is our next slide here, and we can skip this one. And really the purpose of this slide is really taking the results of the revenue requirement, so the overall revenue needs, and the results of the cost of service, that distribution by customer class, and develop proposed rate structures. As I mentioned, that cost of service becomes our basis for our year one rate. So as we go through this, we need to build in those policy discussions. And as we'll talk about here in a moment, we'll be back in front of the Water Commission with our draft analyses, with our recommendations and findings, and gain some of that feedback if we have those policy discussions that we need that input on as we move forward. And then ultimately gain that feedback from you all and that recommendation from you all on how we move that forward. A couple of the goals I put the next slide in kind of more to highlight the middle one there, or the third from the bottom, the affordability side of this. As we go through this, we're going to establish rates that meet the revenue needs of each utility. We've worked really hard over the past couple of studies to establish rates that are easy to understand and administer, as well as having that, that conservation-oriented rate structure. And our cost of service provides us with that equitable or proportional and non-discriminatory based rates. Now we're really one of the new or focus elements, I'll say this time, is on that affordability side. So in the past, we've built in the customer assistance program costs where you've helped some of your customers. And then how do we expand that? How does that work with the study you're just starting off that you talked about previously? And how can we roll those into there? So as Liesl mentioned, we're going to be coordinating on this as they work through their process and we work through our process to incorporate some of those goals and results as part of this. The next slide has our next steps. As I mentioned, we're just kicking this off. We're getting into the data review. We'll be going through the technical analysis and then coming back to staff and working through the Water Commission. Primarily January, February, we anticipate we'll be back in front of you all with those draft results. As I mentioned, talk about those findings, recommendations, and gain that policy feedback. Based on that, we are planning on, as usual with our rate studies, going to the Finance Committee in March. That would just set the stage for our Proposition 218 process where we mail the customer notifications, and then we'd hold that public hearing in June, and then ultimately July 1 would be the rate implementation. So that's that first month of our fiscal year 24-25 period. And with that, I will turn it back over to the Water Commission and staff for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions from Commission? Any public comment?
I see no hands raised.
Okay. Thank you all. I think we can go ahead and move to the next item, which is the environmental services for the Water Resources Operating and Maintenance Building Project.
Vice Chair. I apologize that I need to leave, but I wanted to express support for both this item we just heard and also this upcoming item I've been briefed on and am supportive of moving forward.
Thank you, Councilmember.
While Mr. Rare gets seated, I'll just kind of kick it off. This current activity is just kind of the beginning of this project. The actions today are fairly minor in nature, but given the significance and expenditures of this project, we wanted to bring it to you, get any questions you might have answered. As this project starts to go through the process, we eventually bring on a designer. Could be questions in the public, and just want to make sure that there's clarity here. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Rare.
All right, good morning, Vice Chair Snyder and Commissioners. I'm pleased to be here today to introduce the Water Resources Operations and Maintenance Building. As Joshua Hagmark said, my name is Bradley Rare, and I'm a Principal Project Manager here in Water Resources. So I figured we would start by just revisiting the background of the desalination facility kind of at a high level. As you probably all know, the desalination facility was initially permitted and built with a temporary coastal development permit back in 1991 timeframe. That was in response to an extraordinary drought conditions. Subsequent to that, our water supply improved, and the city had the forethought, though, to maintain the permits necessary to make it a permanent facility. So in 1996, we obtained a permanent coastal development permit. As the drought conditions worsened in the early 2010s, the city began the process to reactivate the desalination facility. That heavily relied on the 1996 Coastal Development Permit and the EIR that was developed at that time. That's important to note here in our conversation today because it really applied the prior CDP permit conditions and the approval. It relied on that. And the specifics there were really that the administrative space was established and permitted for the facility on site. And there were not additional staff facilities contemplated at that time. And so it really relied on the kind of the input from the 1990s design as far as administrative space. And because we didn't want to reopen up a lot of those elements of the CDP, we proceeded that way. So since the plant was reactivated in 2015 timeframe, and we have been operating the plant regularly with IDE, our contract operator, we've learned a lot about the limitations of what that permit really means for long-term supply and use of this facility. And so on this slide, I wanted to just kind of refresh where this desal plant is located for everybody. You may be familiar with this neighborhood, but if you get off the freeway at Garden Street and you drive down Yananali, before you even get to the desal plant, you'll see the city's annex yard on the left-hand side. And that's an industrial site that has a variety of different uses for public works operations and actually the city as a whole. And so it's approximately a 2.5 acre parcel. It has a large radio tower you can see as you drive by it. It has bulk storage materials for paving and water main replacement. It has light standards. It even stores Parks and Rec equipment and the beachcomber that cleans East and West Beach on a regular basis. And so these are a lot of the back of the house operations that are there. Across the street from both of these are the El Acero Water Resource Center. So the city has a lot of property kind of in this area. It's all very critical for our operations. And so as we contemplate how would we address some of the limitations of the CDP and looking at what the city needs to think about for long-term desal plant operations, the city's annex yard has been identified as a potential site for a new building. And so I'd like to kind of introduce the concept here of what we're calling the Water Resources Operations and Maintenance Building. The site we're looking at has the capability to accommodate about a 50 by 150 foot industrial style building that ultimately would address a lot of the deficiencies of kind of what the desal plant operations are dealing with over the last 5 years. We've learned a lot talking to the contract operator, and one of which is the administrative space for both the folks that are supporting the operation as well as the operators themselves are really not sufficient for the number of staff that they need to have on hand. They also lack, the site currently lacks showers and locker rooms in order to provide for proper hygiene after the end of a long shift. These operators are running 12-hour shifts and are dealing with chemicals on site. And so having a locker room with showers and a space that they can kind of clean themselves up at the end of the day before leaving to go home is an important component of what we found from them. There is a small on-site lab. I'll kind of orient you in a second to where it is currently, but we would be most likely building in an on-site lab into this new Water Resources Operations and Maintenance Building. Material and equipment storage is currently being handled on the desal site through the use of several shipping containers. It's very modular based right now, and most of these shipping containers are not climate controlled, so we're putting very expensive pieces of equipment, or the contractor is right now, in places that ultimately should be put into more of a permanent storage home. And also they don't really have an indoor maintenance facility in order to do maintenance, so often the maintenance they're having to do is outdoors in the sun or in the cold weather. We're also taking a more kind of global approach here and looking at water resources functions as a whole and potentially incorporating some reprieve quarters for our ESWs or other staff members that are working long shifts that, as we talked before, lots of our operators are working out of the area, and sometimes after a long day when emergencies happen, it's not safe for them to drive home immediately. And so having a place where they can get some rest before they ultimately have to make the drive home is something that we're considering building into this project description. based on the location that we just talked about, there are a few design considerations we need to take into account. Number one, if you know that neighborhood, El Estero, the desal plant, they're built to kind of be camouflaged in the local area, which is really an industrial zone of town. And so we'd be looking at designing the building in order to fit in so that it doesn't stick out as you're driving by the freeway or down Yananali Street. It also provides an industrial function. Water resources and in conjunction with sustainability and resiliency are also working on a water resources system-wide climate change and sea level rise adaptation plan right now. And I don't know if we've talked about it recently, but this area has been identified as one that will most likely experience significant sea level rise impacts, not in the immediate future, but long term. And so as we consider how to build this building, we need to take sea level rise into account, especially as it is adjacent to Laguna Channel. So this building would also need to be built to the city's green building standards that we have as a policy. It'll also need to address energy efficiency. And so, as we all know, desal is a heavy user of energy for us, but the building itself would need to be built to be net zero. And then because of the location we're proposing to put this on, there are several annex yards functions that we would have to be offsetting. And so we need to take that into account as we propose putting a building there. Predominantly right now, where we're proposing to put the building, as you can see on the map, is where we have several bulk storage items. And so relocating those in order to make space, we have to start moving puzzle pieces around on this annex yard. Because while there is a lot of paved area, it is a very congested, heavily used back of the house operations facility for us. And so I've started the conversation with many of the other public works department divisions, as well as other departments within the city, in order to understand what this offset might cause as far as impacts to them.
Quick question. So the diesel treatment trains are very noisy, and although they are somewhat insulated, it's still very noisy. And so, and this is going to be right next to it. So that should be a consideration, how that building is built and to take into account, because if you're going to have people working there, in office spaces, it'd be a challenge. So just to keep that in mind.
Thank you. So to take you back a second, when we talked about the limitations of the original CDP, you can see on your screen, you've got the operator control room right in the middle of the site, and then you've got a laboratory plant manager office and a unisex bathroom. And so those are located in a current location where it also they're not ideal for long-term expansion of this facility. So as we start considering expanding desal, if and when that time comes, these functions are ultimately going to have to be moved anyway, and so we're taking this longer-term approach for the site. And you can see I've kind of just superimposed where a future treatment train D would go, and so we're looking at this building probably having a roll-up door, and some kind of maintenance area up on the north area that ultimately would utilize a driveway and a gate that's already there, so that staff wouldn't have to be driving out on Yananali Street, which would cause a public safety issue when you're bringing in equipment around. As well as it would add to the security of the facility. And so just staying very high level here, the project is essentially broken up into 4 phases at this point. The initial phase that we're here talking about today, as far as the contract goes, is an environmental assessment broken up into 2 phases, a site investigation and surveys in order to inform the second phase of CEQA and permitting required for this building. We also, following today's activities and ultimately going to council, we would be embarking on issuing a request for proposals for a designer in order to begin the process, in order to focus on the building design and then also get prepared for getting the approvals in place to build a building. We expect the design to take probably up to two years, also to get all the approvals necessary for the building. And so we wouldn't anticipate construction of a building starting until probably mid-2025 or early 2026, depending on how that design process goes. The construction of this building is heavily dependent on the funding. So as we just got done talking about rates in the city's, or the water resources needs for funding, this building, we're looking at evaluating many different funding sources, everything between grants and some of the SRF funding that Mr. Hagmark talked about. But we'll be working on that process, and we expect that process to take probably up to 2 years to secure funding if we start now. So the item for the recommendation today is really this environmental assessment and permitting contract. City staff issued a request for proposals, and we received 5 proposals from many of our local environmental consultants. Through an interview process, we selected Dudek based on their approach and qualifications. And so we've broken this work up into 2 phases. The first one is a site investigation in order to really lay the groundwork for what constraints are we going to be playing with, not only just for the building, but also for any work that needs to happen in order to move operations around on the annex yard to accommodate this building. And then that will ultimately inform our designers on what we can do with the building. And then second phase will be the CEQA process and getting overall permitting for the building. The approach here, the assumption is that we would be getting an EIR addendum ultimately to seek CEQA approval. And then the building and the parcel itself is within the city's appealable jurisdiction, so for Coastal Commission. So we have the ability to submit it and have the city issue the coastal development permit. Only if it's appealed would we have to go to the Coastal Commission for approval. And so with that, this is undoubtedly the first of probably multiple stops with you all, and we intend to keep you all informed on the progress of the project. But the first step starts with seeking recommendation of approval from you all for the environmental services contract with Dudek. Following approval, we would ultimately, and authorization at council, if we move that direction, we would issue a request for proposals shortly after in order to begin the selection of a designer for the building. And that concludes my presentation on the building and why we're here today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So any questions from Commission? I had just one question looking at the timeline and the need for staff there. Are there any temporary reprieve locker room kind of options if we're looking towards a 2027 opening of this facility?
Yes, Vice Chair Snyder. We've been working with the DBO contractor right now, and we're in the 5th year of that contract with them, and so we're working through trying to understand their role and how they're going to play a role moving forward. And we've identified some temporary facilities that we've put on site in order to really accommodate the construction of the the product water pump station upgrade project that's going on. So we've been able to put some temporary facilities under that project in order to help lighten or provide some additional facilities that haven't been there. But the intent there is that they're temporary until such time we can make a determination on a future building.
Does El Estero have facilities that could be shared?
I think the temporary stuff we have on site works for now. The locker room's pretty busy at El Estero. Wasn't oversized, so it's pretty busy there. But they do have a trailer now for a locker room trailer, and they have an office trailer that's, again, temporary in nature. They ultimately have to be removed, but I think we're hoping we'll bridge that gap.
Got it. Thank you. Is there any public comment?
No, not at this time.
All right. I'd like to move to recommend the approval of the environmental services contract with Dudek.
Second.
Can we take a vote?
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Commissioner Keller?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Snyder?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring it home. We're almost done here. Thank you so much for being patient with us. Wanted to, I guess, bring to your attention, continue to work on efforts to try and improve the connection. Between our educational institutions and our workforce. So we had a meeting this week to just talk about how we get high school, middle school folks thinking about careers in water resources. And then, of course, we had representatives from UCSB, Ventura College there as well to talk about that upskilling. So as they come in, we continue to need them to take classes and work on certifications. So anyway, more to come on that, but it was helpful just kind of building that relationship with our educational institutions. We are in the midst of desal asset evaluation. So in our contract, it calls for this, our ability to go in. We have a third party that's going in and assessing how the facility is being maintained. Is it consistent with the contract? And then they're also testing the various operations of the facility to make sure that it is functioning consistent with our contract. So that is should be wrapped up by the end of this month. AMI, first part of October, we rolled it out to 6,000 of our customers, and we'll do another batch starting in November. So that's moving along. We'll be talking to the Harbor Commission tonight about protecting our intake structure. We've had some near misses and some damage done from, there's an area around the desal, there's a buoy that identifies where it is, and there's supposed to be clearance around there, but there's an area where boaters can come in and just anchor for the night. And we're wanting to kind of increase that buffer, just to make sure that we don't have any issues there. Of course, that runs into issues with the Coastal Commission and limiting access to the water, so there's all kinds of challenges there. And then you may have noticed we're doing some restoration work on East Beach. That's part of some mitigation that we're doing related to desal. So we're have some black plastic down, we're killing ice plant, and then we're going to be restoring native plants and dunes along East Beach. So if you see that, we got some media press on that, and so just wanted to let you know. And of course, I've enlightened you with the El Estero bids. We're still going through that. We still want to make sure we have a valid bid, and of course, understanding in what areas were our biggest discrepancies from the engineer's estimate. So we'll be doing our analysis, and I think it'll be coming back to you all December. Does that sound right? Yeah. So we'll be bringing that to you for consideration in December. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Quickly, is the diesel plant up and running? They had a problem with the intake pipes?
Yes.
Yep, good.
Okay. All right.
I think then we can go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for the patience staying late.
Yeah.